Wonderful. Well, bom dia. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear me? It seems okay? No.
They can hear it all.
Sei.
Sorry, I went to this incorrect.
Sei. Aç. Okay.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today for our session here with the Institute of International Finance, really graciously hosted here at the Turkish Pavilion, focused on mobilizing private capital for climate and nature finance. Okay, so the lesson here is we need to have the microphones as you would be consuming a delicious ice cream right in front of your mouth. So, and maybe a nice ice cream is what everyone needs after standing in line for an hour in the heat. So thankfully we have all of our panelists here with us today and really are excited for this conversation with some, I think probably cumulative years of experience working on climate and nature finance, maybe close to 100 years, I would think, looking across the panel. So wonderful to have you all with us. So maybe just to set the context for this discussion, COP30 is clearly happening at a time of unprecedented change for the global economy and the multilateral system, the impacts of which are quite stark when we are thinking about climate change. Clearly, I think we're seeing some integration of climate priorities into economic and industrial policy, seeing this as a strategic imperative. But with the departure of the U.S., things are definitely changing. There is, of course, increasing politicization of this agenda, leading to some strategic, reputational questions and also legal risks for the industry. At the same time, of course, emissions are increasing, costs of physical damage are increasing rapidly, creating a really urgent impetus for investments in adaptation and resilience. And as we've heard in a number of the pavilions throughout the conference, we are at or near climate tipping points, which are going to create feedback loops within the climate system, also posing resilience concerns. However, perhaps cloudy, darkening outlook, strong political headwinds, but it's clear that there is momentum here. I think we've heard that definitely last week in Sao Paulo, where the number of great sessions, new initiatives announced, and what we're, I think, seeing is a shift from messaging really to delivery, and a lot of examples of financial sector innovation in supporting clients as they move towards resilience, try to accelerate their transitions. So today, with the great breadth of experience and sectoral insight across this panel, we want to take stock of where we are. Obviously, 10 years from Paris, 4 years from Glasgow, focus on what's working, what needs rethinking, looking at the key priorities today in this setting, adaptation, resilience, nature finance really critical, and looking ahead, seeing what we need to do collaboratively to enable transformative change in how transition resilience priorities can be integrated across the economy and investment decisions. So we have a great panel with us. We have Judson Berge, Managing Director at the Chief Sustainability Office of UBS. We have Abid Karmali, Managing Director of Environmental Business Advisory at Bank of America. We have Irem Barzilay, Director of Sustainability at Guarantee BBVA. Oliver Phillips, Head of Sustainable Finance for Emerging Markets at Barclays, and Mikala Krishnan, Partner at the McKinsey Global Institute. So we're going to start with a very brief round of questions, kind of brief introductions. What's brought you to COP, and what do all these themes mean to you when thinking about adaptation and resilience? So, Judson, a few quick words, and then we'll go across the panel.
Yeah, thanks very much for the IEF for inviting, obviously for Turkey for hosting us. Look, I think for UBS, I think we're really motivated to try and find those new collaborations where we really can partner up with public sector, DFIs, MDBs, sort of bring our expertise to the table, obviously work with our clients. So we see you being here at COP as a chance really to further those collaborations. We actually do have quite a strong Brazilian franchise. We're the leading, I think, bank for green issuance in Brazil. So certainly a lot of our clients are active in the space. I mean, on adaptation, it's something we're still exploring, honestly, trying to figure out where we can fit in. We've done some work with our private clients in sort of coastal resilience, mangroves, those sorts of things, all small-scale projects. We're trying to build from that to see if we can work a bit on things bigger scale, which I can speak about later. But for us, really, I have to admit, we're not COP veterans like some of the others here. So really, it's us just trying to understand better, where we really can engage in some of the new activities and new programs that are being put together. Let me pass on.
Yeah, thanks. I think what's brought us to COP and with a focus on resilience is that over the past 12 months, I would say the increased focus on resilience from both companies and investors is become apparent, and we see it in some of the innovations that we've been able to bring to the market. In fact, just a few weeks ago, we were one of the co-arrangers on the Tokyo Resilience Bond. So that's the first bond that uses the Climate Bond Initiative resilience taxonomy. So that's an important innovation. And just as one anecdote, it was 7 times oversubscribed. So that suggests a healthy appetite for investments in resilience. And I think, at the other end of the spectrum, we've been dabbling in the blended finance area, and we're seeing good results from, one of the investments we've made, which is in a insure resilience debt fund. So looking at, micro insurance delivered through microfinance institutions. So focusing on, the small holders, so some of the most vulnerable. So I think, the big pools of capital and then the more challenging end, we're seeing some interesting results, and I think that gives us hope that there's momentum building, and some of that may translate into something tangible on the global goal for adaptation too.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for the invitation. So, for me, it's a very, here it's very different than Turkey. So, for me, it's very important to inspire others when I go back to Turkey, what I see here, what I feel here. So, nature, finance, and also adaptation is a kind of a new thing in emerging markets. So we are trying to innovate the market back in Turkey, and we will continue to do that. And also in our region, it's, as I said, it's very different from here, but we started to feel the water scarcity, almost 40% of our population is living in water scarce areas. And also in Turkey, one of the main activities that we have been doing for many years is agriculture. So also our population is growing very fast. We reach almost 100 million people in our country. So the agriculture practices is growing wildly. So with new innovation, new financing instruments, one of our main purposes is to inspire our clients with, regenerative agriculture practices, to educate others and try to, adapt best practices that I saw here. So it's very nice to be here.
Hopefully the second one works as well. There we go. Success. Well, given that I run our sustainable finance business and Brazil is our second largest market within our EM franchise, I run our EM sustainable finance business, and this is the second largest market. I don't really have a choice. I think I would be fired if I wasn't here. And in a nice, happy coincidence, the number one is Turkey. So this is everything coming together very nicely for me. I think this is my 4th trip to Brazil alone this year, and I think that really reflects the opportunity that is here. And the reason I've been coming is that there's been so much focus, and COP has really. I don't think COP has kind of created new motivation, because I think the motivation has been there, but it's really given people an opportunity to kind of focus their efforts within the Brazilian market. And there's some great things that I'm sure we'll get onto in the rest of the panel that we've been spending some time on here. But seeing kind of where we are in this city, and I think the increased focus that everyone's mentioned on resilience over the last sort of, for me, 18 months or so. And seeing that continue here, and a lot more focus on how do we actually just get things done. Let's stop talking about what does it mean to finance adaptation and resilience, and actually saying, well, how do we actually get transactions done that support it? I think is really great to see.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me as? Okay, terrific. I have this fan blowing in my back, so if you see my hair moving around like it's some kind of commercial, apologies for that. It doesn't mean
That's
that
a good adaptation
yeah,
choice.
exactly. I'm actually probably the most comfortable on this panel right now because I'm right next to the fan. I think for me, I'm part of the McKinsey Global Institute, which is McKinsey's business and economics research arm. It's essentially our think tank, and McKinsey is a global management consulting firm. So for us, coming to COP is incredibly important for 2-3 reasons. The first is that we're a global organization, both McKinsey as well as the McKinsey Global Institute. It's in our name. And so for us, it's an amazing opportunity to connect with people from across the world, from across sectors, financial institutions, real economy actors, and just really get a pulse of what's going on, what's on people's minds. And then secondly, just to try and create opportunities and spaces where people across sectors have dialogue, right? Because often we're engaged with either people within our organizations or companies or within our sector, and I think this is an amazing opportunity to connect and foster dialogue cross-sectorally and across regions. I think for me, the 2-3 things that have really stood out based on that is, one, this incredible growing realization that as we undertake the energy transition, the net zero transition, it's not just about emissions reduction, but doing so in a way that is affordable, reliable, and enables competitiveness. I think that's becoming much more of the zeitgeist, the way people are approaching this agenda. And I think that's a good thing, right? Because that is what enables this to be a durable agenda, actually truly sustainable agenda. I think the second, and Jeremy, you alluded to this as well, is this sense that I think coming into this, a lot of people had a vibe maybe that we aren't making progress and there's no opportunities and everybody's stalling on the agenda. And our research, which I'll talk about later in the panel, but also the conversations we've had with organizations in the last week in Belém and last week in Sao Paulo suggests that that's not actually true, right? That yes, we still have more work to do, but there are real pockets of progress, windows of opportunity, however you might want to call it, where there is progress being made and there are opportunities. And so I think that has also been very interesting. It shows up in our data, but it's also been mirrored in conversations we've had. And then finally, as others have said too, the growing importance of adaptation and resilience on the agenda. And we've heard that a lot from financial institutions, certainly, but actually we've also heard it a lot, and I think importantly, from real economy actors. And I think if real economy actors are not talking about it, finance alone will be like pushing on a string. And so it's important that we're also hearing that mirrored by the real economy.
No, thank you so much, everyone. I think that really shows the diversity of entry points into this discussion, but really a strong focus on connecting the dots between all of these different issues, different actors, and really making it real on the ground. And one of your last points, this issue of pushing on the proverbial string, or making the water flow uphill, however we want to frame it. This really speaks to the question of the relationship between the financial sector and the economy and what is needed to really shift the economics of investment decisions as opposed to this narrative around scaling up finance. Clearly, finance has a key role to play. And Judson, maybe I can turn to you for some thoughts on this question specifically. I mean, we've been having the great pleasure to work with you as chair of our Sustainable Finance Working Group and helping to think through what this narrative might look like, what's a more practical and suitable theory of change for thinking about these relationships as we contend with this changing global environment, when we're thinking about policy, corporate strategy, finance, and regulation, how this can come together efficiently. What could this really look like, and how does the discussion around adaptation resilience perhaps add a new flavor or dimension to this?
Thanks for that. Look, I think with mitigation, I mean, the investment case is more clear, right? You're getting cash flows back almost immediately when you put a new technology in, so you can build out your investment thesis quite quickly. I think as we discussed last week in Sao Paulo at some of the IF sessions with adaptation, it's different, right? You need to convince people that avoided loss actually is an economic gain, but you still need to pull that forward somehow. But I think the numbers can be quite stark. I'm going to give an example from Switzerland, which was public finance, so it's not the best example, but Switzerland loves to drill things, right? You basically give people in Switzerland a drill, and they'll put it right through a mountain. And so actually back in 2005, there was almost a major flood in downtown Zurich City, and it really would have flooded actually all around the main train station. So the railway and the government, sort of took note of that. And so they really started thinking about, okay, how do we solve for this? So basically they had calculated out that if it had flooded, as sort of a once in 100-year flood, it would have been about 6 billion of damage in downtown Zurich. So what they did is they basically got a big drill, and they spent the past 4 years drilling through a mountain. And it's costing them 170 million, basically to set up a system where if they get the big flood coming down the river, they're going to take it through the mountain and dump it into the Zurich Lake to avoid the flood. But the economics are really quite compelling, right? You spend 170 million now, you avoid a 6 billion damage, which is, even though it's a 100-year flood now with melting glaciers and the increase in the rains, the intensity of the rains that we're experiencing in Zurich, it's pretty guaranteed it's going to happen somewhere probably in the next 10 or 20 years. So they're basically spending upfront 170 million to save 6 billion later. So that's the kind of economic case I think is there for adaptation. But the challenge is still, how do you finance it, right? Who pays for that? Because that one's being paid for essentially by the state. Because the railway is owned by the state partly, and the municipal government's motivated to pay. So the question is, how do you set up structures where essentially the private sector is motivated to pay too? So one thing we're part of actually is a new initiative in the UK. It's called the Flood Action Coalition. And it's basically trying to pull together insurers, municipalities, of course, London, but also utilities and others who basically have some skin in the game and are also thinking about this. Okay, avoided loss actually is economic gain, so we're willing to make upfront investments to provide an element of resilience for flood protection. A different case, situation, but it's the same things. So the question is, how do you build out these collaborations? So back to what you asked about, I think what we need to do quickly is look at adaptation as a multi-stakeholder effort and really figure out the right way to pull together the actors who essentially are going to be holding the bag if we don't adapt and we don't make things more resilient, and then work with them to understand making an investment now actually does generate a financial return for me. It's a form of insurance, right? It's a finding sort of clever collaboration that you can pull together people around an economic case that you can, I think in many cases, prove quite quickly, because you can get a sense for what damages will be, your supply chains, your built infrastructure, and then sort of figure out, okay, if we invest, what are we going to actually avoid in future? So that's the kind of thinking I think we need. It's not about adaptation plans and new regulations on the financial sector. I don't think that's going to get us there. It's more back to some of the points made. Let's figure out what are the projects that we can actually work on together, and how do we get those financed?
No, thank you so much. You brought in a lot of really key issues there that we'll be revisiting throughout the panel. But I think this overarching question of how do we shift from the perception of avoided losses as a cost to a financial gain, how do we consider these types of investments in the same way that we're treating insurance in the economy within the financial system? Definitely a really significant challenge, but I think critical to really incentivize these types of investments and ensure that this does not just fall on the public balance sheet, because obviously not all countries have the fiscal strength of Switzerland, nor do they have the drills, but the risks may be just as significant, if not larger. Michaela, maybe I can turn to you now to complement some of these questions. You are doing a huge amount of very fascinating research at McKinsey on all sorts of topics relating to climate, including on adaptation resilience. We're aware that there's some research which is forthcoming. What are some of the key insights here when we're thinking about what are the costs? How do we understand this? Who pays? And when looking between developed and developing countries, what do you see as some of the key issues around these fiscal considerations? Thanks.
Yeah, so I can also talk later about mitigation transition, but maybe I'll focus on adaptation since we're picking up on where Judson left off, and happy to talk more about the transition as well. So we, as Jeremy mentioned, are doing a big piece of research. It's due to come out next month on the adaptation question. And our starting point, I think people at McKinsey think about themselves sometimes as historians and not just economists and business people. So we had a little fun with it. And our starting point was actually to ask ourselves the question of, have societies actually been thinking about adaptation for a while? And the answer is yes. Humanity has in many ways been adapting, and I'm just saying this more as a fun thought exercise. We're in the Turkey Pavilion here, so we should think about history. But humanity has been adapting for a very long time. We have examples of Mesopotamians implementing irrigation systems. One of my colleagues is from the Netherlands, which used to be called the Low Countries, obviously because they're low-lying regions, building structures called terps, which in Dutch is turpen, fun fact. Structures called terps that help lift structures and prevent them from flooding. So in some ways, as you look at the problem, this is something we've been doing for a long time. And there are actually, unlike in the mitigation case, many proven cost-effective technologies that already exist, right? Of course, we can continue to innovate, and we do need to continue to innovate, but in some sense, this is really not rocket science. And they're cost-effective in the sense, as exactly to Judson's example, that the avoided damage you get when you implement an adaptation solution is much larger typically than the cost to implement the solution, right? So societally, it makes economic sense. So what's the problem? Well, when we look at the data, there's two kinds of problems or two kinds of challenges. The first is, despite the fact that we have many cost-effective proven solutions, we're not actually all adapted around the world even today. So as an example, we looked at heat stress events. Now, these are events that are, like we're experiencing right now in this pavilion, extremely hot and humid conditions. We define them as hot and humid conditions that last for a month or longer. And we find that already there are about a billion people around the world that experience hot and humid, extremely hot and humid conditions lasting for more than a month every year. Less than 20% of those people have access to cooling systems around the world today. So despite the fact that implementing cooling systems like air conditioning is a proven cost-effective solution, we don't have it everywhere in the world today. So that's one kind of problem. The other kind of problem is, of course, that the climate is changing. And if you look at the current trajectory of emissions, despite whatever the world is doing to try and decarbonize, the world is on track to hit 1.5 C of warming sometime in the next decade. And this is not just a year that is above 1.5 C. This is multiple years, a decade or longer, that is consistently above 1.5 C, and hit 2 C by 2050. And understanding that trajectory of emissions, that planning for the future is important, because if you think about adaptation solutions, many of them come with long lead times to implement. So building something like a levee or a flood protection system, your drilling example, maybe in Switzerland it happens in a couple of years. In most parts of the world, including the Netherlands, these projects have taken something like 10 years to implement. So we need to start planning today. And these projects also have long lifetimes. So anything we're putting in place today needs to be resilient to the climate of the future. It's not just built for today. I come from India. One of the classic things that happens in India is we build new road systems, and then a huge rainfall event happens that was not planned for, and then the roads get wiped away, and then you have to rebuild, right? So you need to start thinking about the climate of the future because of this lead time issue and this lifetime issue associated with solutions. Okay, so we have solutions, we have an imperative, but it's still not happening, right? Why is it not happening? And I think there's many reasons, but it comes down to a lot of the things that we've already talked about at its core. The first is that it's a really funny sort of investment, right? What you're doing is you're incurring a cost up front for an avoided benefit or avoided damage in the future, which is a very intangible thing. It's also an avoided damage if you're talking about an acute event. It's an avoided damage that only happens should the event occur. And so that is a very funny sort of investment, both psychologically for human beings to think about value, putting value around. It's also then a funny sort of investment to build financing structures around, exactly as we've been talking about. And so that's one kind of issue, that this is just a different sort of investment that requires both different sorts of psychological and internalizing questions, and then different financing structures or different ways to think about mobilizing finance. The second is that there is a risk awareness gap, right? Many places around the world are not aware of the risks that they experience. I live in the US. The wildfires in Los Angeles were fundamentally a risk awareness challenge, that there was not the perception of risk was less than the actual risk. And then finally, there is indeed a capacity to pay issue, and you see that 20% statistic that I mentioned about lack of air conditioning, a lot of the lack of air conditioning is in developing countries, and so there is a capacity to pay issue. So how do we solve this? I'm not going to solve adaptation finance gaps on this panel in a minute, but I think it's important again to think about the demand side and the supply side, right? And I think we often focus, exactly as you said, on the question of how do you scale finance. I think that's the wrong question to ask. I think the right question to ask is how do we drive the right demand signals so that communities, companies want to invest. And that's everything from new forms of standards, thinking about incentives associated with adaptation, thinking about building better risk awareness, and then how do we think about the supply side, which is these interesting sorts of collaborations on the financing structures, bringing all forms of the capital stack to bear, not making this a finance alone problem, and thinking about how do we scale technology. So there's things on the demand side, things on the supply side.
No, thank you so much.
And that was what is going to eventually be a 100-page report synthesized in 5 minutes. So thank you for bearing with me.
Fabulous. That's the most executive of all executive summaries I think I've ever heard. No, but thank you. And highlighting that point around demand signals, what actually is a strong incentive here? What are the policy measures? What are the market norms that can help drive this into decision making? Is a great way to perhaps bring in some perspectives from other financial institutions. And Oliver, maybe I'll start with you. We've heard a lot about the business case for adaptation, resilience, investment. I think the numbers are quite compelling. But of course, these accrue quite unevenly across the economy. There may be a very strong need for this financing, but of course, not always are these needs going to translate into commercial opportunities. So how do you see this business case evolving, perhaps here in Brazil or in other markets that you're working within? And what do you see as some of the key levers to improve it?
So first of all, I'm going to apologize to Abid because you heard me say the same thing yesterday when we were sat next to each other. so you've got to listen to this again. You'll tell me which one I did better. But so I'm going to disagree slightly in that I do think we have the right financing models for adaptation and resilience. But I think we're thinking about it in the wrong way and we're trying to use the wrong ones. The amount of times that I have a conversation with someone about financing an adaptation and resilience project and they start talking to me about ROI. And it just does not make sense to me at all. There is one corner of the market that inherently should understand this, and I think would understand it if we framed it in the right way. And that is credit investors. So credit investors care about one thing. How do I get my money back at the end of my financing? I lend you 100, I want to get 100 back, plus something extra, which is my, to compensate me for giving you the money. But what they really care about, more than what the coupons are and all the rest about it, what really matters is, am I going to get that initial capital back? So when we talk about adaptation, we talk about resilience, what we're talking about is protecting your business activities so that in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 or 30 or whatever it happens to be, you're still able to do the things that you've been doing and you're not having to cover a whole load of unexpected massive outlays that mean that you're not going to get that money back. And I think this is something where the world of credit needs to really think about, well, can I rephrase how I'm trying to do this? And part of that is not talking about adaptation and resilience projects and trying to get financing for those. I think I'd love to say that would be possible, but the market isn't going to reward that today. And we don't have enough time to wait until we can build a market that will reward that. So we have to think about, well, how do we look at this in a different manner? And so for me, it's really about how do you embed it into your project design from day one. So you say, right, I'm going to build a road. I'm going to finance a road. Now, the cost of this road is going to be 10% higher than the last road that you financed in a very similar region. But the reason for that is this, and the reason I've decided to take those decisions, increase the cost, and therefore need more financing for it, is because I've done my homework and the studies show that, yes, I need to do this to protect it. And what that means is, take that project over there, well, if you'd been part of that, you would now be having to restructure it because I've not been able to collect the toll payments or whatever it happens to be because a large section has just washed away and cars can't go through. And that's something that as banks, we can really get our heads around because that's a proper credit-driven conversation, and that is what banks do day in and day out. I think it's a struggle when we move out of the credit world. When we start looking at things around equity, and I see lots of companies that come up with, they want to be the next greatest, best resilience technology company. And I'm sure there are going to be some that are absolutely fantastic. And I know some people that are doing some really great things in this space, don't get me wrong. But for the equity markets, it's a much harder conversation because you're saying, well, I'm trying to grow my capital. I'm trying to, the metric by which I am measured on, if I'm an equity investor, the metric by which I'm compensated for is my return on investor capital. If I take $1 of people's money and I invest it, how much more can I get out of that? And a lot about what we're talking in this space is not about, it is going to be about increasing value, but in a very, very long-term and very intangible way. And so I think that the equity market has definitely got some room to catch up. But the real thing for me is that the business case is there. The understanding is there. The tools are there. It's a framing issue that we've got at the moment. And I think that if we strip everything back and we really focus on how do we frame this within what we have today, I think we'll see a lot more happening than has been happening for the last 2 years, while we've got sidetracked with a lot of very important conversations, but maybe taken us away from where we can really act.
Well, I think that's one of the key takeaways that we can draw from this. We have the tools, the business case is strong. It's a question of really linking those up. And I think your remarks around credit versus equity also reflect what we've seen in the transition sphere, looking across the spectrum of investments of decarbonizing high-emitting assets versus new and emerging technologies. That's going to require a much different set of financial solutions. And so keeping that front of mind is really important when going into those conversations. Ira, maybe I can turn to you. I mean, we've talked a lot about investments in what would be considered hard infrastructure for adaptation, but adaptation is not only a question of doing that, it's a question of changing business practices. It's a question as well around taking an integrated view on the relationships between climate, nature, resilience priorities. And so maybe you could just give us some perspectives from your work at Guarantee BBVA, how you're approaching this internally, and maybe some examples of some of the types of instruments that you have been issuing in Turkey as well, and how you're seeing all of this evolve in the market.
Thank you, Jeremy. I do agree that business case is there for adaptation, mitigation, and transition. Sometimes when we think about the nature finance, I think these three concepts are hand in hand. So for example, when we talk about regenerative agriculture practices, transition finance is there, mitigation is there, and also in some cases I was in another pavilion joining a session. For example, regenerative agriculture practices are more resilient for also extreme weather events, because the root balls are even bigger than the usual agriculture practices. So I think the main idea is we need to make this business case a little more clear for everyone within the bank, because not everyone is expert on sustainability. So we are working very closely with the risk guys. We are trying to make them understand these are a little more feasible than the usual thing. So in that point also BBVA comes in, because Europe is leading the sustainability way right now. They're investing a lot for us to understand what is going on between the sectors also. So they hired almost 30 people from different sectors, sectoral experts, in order to speak the same language with our clients, understand their needs, and what we can offer to them. So this is our main idea is to innovate the the financial sector in Turkey, but on top of it we are trying to also concentrate on how we can increase our volumes. I think renewable energy financing is a good example for that. We have been financing almost since 2014. As Guarantee, we almost finance 1/4 of renewable capacity in Turkey. We saw the opportunity there, and we, as a group, we approach sustainability not as a risk but a business opportunity. Our motto is sustainability as a growth engine. So we are approaching different teams right now from a similar perspective, circular economy, regenerative agriculture practices, and also nature finance is a growth engine for us. So we are trying to understand, explore what is needed in every sector. So this is our somehow new motto, and also we issued a very innovative bond last week. So in the next round, I will also deep dive on what we did with the investors, with the banks, and everything.
Well, maybe you could share some of that with us just now, and
Okay,
give an example
sure,
of what
sure.
this looks like.
Last
in
week
the
we
ocean space.
issued like the first blue biodiversity bond in Turkey. We started with the biodiversity angle because last year our Colombia office, like BBVA Colombia, issued the first biodiversity bond with IFC. We like learn their experience, understand what was the underlying assets in that transaction. But and then like it's a narrative thing. Like we don't have forests or mangroves in Turkey, so we started to understand what would be the the biodiversity angle that we can understand, like we can approach in Turkey. So we started to focus on the Mediterranean basin, and we have realized that the biodiversity is we are losing the biodiversity in that region because like Mediterranean is hosting almost like many different species in when it comes to the fishes and everything. So we issued the bond, and in order to support the best practices in agricide fishing, and also in different like sustainable blue activities, and we are trying to also educate our clients in that region and try to support their financing activities.
Excellent, and quite strong investor interest as well. We have a
Like not that much, to be honest.
Okay.
Like we started to talk with many, like banks. We try to understand how they are approaching the biodiversity because it was a new thing for us. And also in Turkey, what we have realized also is there is no due diligences or like studies when it comes to the biodiversity, how much we lost during the years and everything. But at the end of the day, it took almost 10 months to find an investor to invest because also the pricings were not very, advantageous for us because, like even us is approaching things when it comes to sustainable finance, like incentivized pricing. You are looking for some, incentives to do that kind of pioneer, transaction. But at the end of the day, as I told you, like it took 10 months to find someone. We started with $50 million, and then we decreased till to 20 million.
well, so
It
clear-
wasn't easy.
no, but it wasn't easy. But congratulations
Yeah, thank you.
on the success of completion.
Thank
I think these pioneering transactions build on each other over
Yes.
time, and I think that's something that we've seen in many dimensions of the nature finance
Yeah.
space. Also, different types of innovative instruments at the sovereign level, and. Abid, maybe that's a good transition to bring you into the conversation here. You have done a tremendous amount of work on nature-related financing issues, how we start to conceive of these risks, opportunities, dependencies, and impacts within the economy, including working with the TNFD and working with Judson, also TNFD. How would you say that the market is evolving, and what's the level of understanding around nature as a driver of risk and the potential for interesting and innovative investment vehicles in this space? I mean, are we seeing investor interest growing in this? Maybe also some perspective on the developed versus emerging markets in this space.
Yeah, so I think, exactly to your point, Iram, I think, companies and investors are realizing that natural capital is, enhancing natural capital is one of the best ways to deliver resilience benefits. And it, touches on some of the examples we've heard as well. Judson on the Flood Action Coalition. I think in the UK, the focus will probably be on, enhancing wetlands. I think these are all ways that credit risk will be diminished, hopefully. So I think, those developments are beginning. I think, we have to be realistic about the fact that notwithstanding the efforts of, the TNFD and other groups, we're still at a very early stage. Judson and I were in Sao Paulo last week for the TNFD task force plenary session, and I think the impression I got, there's now 730 something early adopters of the framework. There's good momentum with ISSB having a board decision to say it's going to lean heavily upon the TNFD, moving towards a nature standard setting process. So those are all good signs. If you dig a bit deeper, the reports that have been published today, the disclosures, there's a lot of focus on the strategy and the governance, much less so to date on risk management and metrics. So I think it's one has to kind of look at it in the round and see where the progress really is. But in terms of product adoption, and I mentioned some of the examples, so maybe I can give you a few more. I think we are seeing lots of interest in products that are building in resilience. So, simple example, we've done a couple of debt for nature swaps, one with Gabon, one with Ecuador. Those two transactions were different from previous debt for nature swaps because they were done in the public markets. So again, bringing greater transparency, bringing a wider pool of investors to the table, and both of them were oversubscribed. Investors understood that one of the areas that they were helping to invest in was, for example, building resilience through the Amazon bioeconomic corridor in Ecuador. So, I think we're seeing good development, and I expect that to continue into next year as well.
No, thank you so much. And that question of how this looks at from the perspective of private versus sovereign issuance, a very, very important one when thinking about investment vehicles for adaptation. Going back to what you were mentioning earlier, of course, the risk-return profile of some of these large investments that accrue benefits to multiple stakeholders might be more attractive if they're wrapped into the context of a broader sovereign vehicle. So, yeah, important to think about what that all looks like. Well, as we are running down on our time, we have a number of other questions and themes that we wanted to address, but I can see that we've actually had a great crowd join us for this discussion, and I wonder if anyone has any questions for the audience, or from the audience for the speakers that they'd like to pose. So maybe there's a microphone here for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Ruth Spencer from the island of Antigua and Barbuda. And have you done any scenarios that provide alternatives to local adaptation resilient projects other than capital? The reason I'm saying this, I work with local community groups. We hardly have any money, but we use partnerships. For example, I donate my time. I'm a master's degree from Yale. I help with the project preparations, the case studies. I need architectural drawings. I reach out to private sector colleagues who will donate their time to enable us to get a lot of things done in lieu of capital. So what I want to know, and we are moving, the hardest thing is when we need equipment that requires actual cash. So have you, for adaptation resilience, ever considered voluntary and in-kind help that really pushes the process forward? Because the local people know what needs to be done. For example, you mentioned nature-based solutions. We have the mangroves, the wetlands. We just need to keep cleaning them so that the vessels can go in. That's a free service. And I think integrating local experiences, the local knowledge with the private sector finance will push us a long way ahead. Thank you for the contributions. It's good to hear.
Thank you so much. Any colleagues like to share some thoughts in response?
Yeah, no, thanks for a great comment and question. And I think so we have looked at it in a micro sense. We've looked at it in our US home market, which is where we have a whole segment which we call community development finance institutions. So a similar idea where it's local community financing. And what we've done is we've worked with philanthropic organizations, including Rockefeller and others, to think about how we can come up with an open source, I think it's called a resilience financing framework tool. I probably butchered it, but I think you get the gist of it. And the idea is, as those local community organizations are delivering loans to local entrepreneurs and segments of the population, how can they build in resilience from the get-go so that you get the kind of 3% upfront? I think that's the calculation for the Swiss one, right? It's so roughly 3% upfront, but you probably reduce the risk by about 50 to 60%. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think you make a great point, which is the people on the ground, on the front lines, often know what needs to get done, and so it's how do we support them? I mean, we're very fortunate at UBS to have as our largest client base a lot of wealthy individuals who come to us to manage their money, but often they want to do something good too, and part of that can be through philanthropy. So you mentioned mangroves. We've done a number of programs where, in the first instance, it's just providing pure technical assistance through philanthropy to local organizations, but then you can start to build into it. I think Oliver made a great point, right? This is about integration and thinking holistically and not putting things in these silos. There's mitigation, there's adaptation, there's economic development there. Actually, it's all together, particularly when you're on the front lines of an emerging market country. So we've been trying to do some investments with, say, the Mangrove Alliance, and we're part of this transaction by the group called RARE, where it's about sort of supporting local fishery communities. And part of it's about mangrove restoration that helps with flood resilience. Part of it is about helping preserve the local fishery species population that can help with the economic development. So you can build in a holistic sort of thinking about a set of activities, some of which generate income, some of which don't necessarily, but that's okay, particularly if you're doing something at a sub-commercial rate of return. So I think there are cases where it is about philanthropy. There are cases where it is a sub-commercial returns, you get some sort of blended finance arrangement, and that's okay, right? Not everything has to be sort of at a commercial rate of return. And so I think we have to be smart about what kind of finance makes sense in which case.
And just to add to the examples that were given, I think part of what I think about a lot is we can do this in individual pockets, but how do we create a process by which this happens at a community level more, right? So that it's not just, a community happens to do it at a community level, but how do we make it part of the adaptation exercise? And there's some interesting examples of a few programs that are trying to almost incubate the idea of community-led resilience, and then think about how do you actually, what does the process for that look like? How do you identify the right projects? How do you build capacity in communities? How do you link those communities with the right financing mechanisms so that it isn't just one-off things that happen at a community level, but just a broader effort? And I'm happy to connect you with those organizations, because for me, that's actually would be success if these aren't just individualized pockets of things, but this becomes a mechanism by which this can happen at scale.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for the question and comment and the great responses. We have just a few minutes left, and so now maybe I can pose one question to the panel again for reactions. And if we envision looking forward, let's envision we're 12 months from now and that we're COP31, potentially in Turkey. In an ideal world, what would you be celebrating as a really significant step forward? I think we've heard a lot of great, interesting, promising examples of innovative products, the role of policy, bringing in different parts of the capital stack. What would you see as the single biggest win in terms of the financial system's capacity to mobilize capital for climate and nature? Maybe we can go in reverse order here and come back around the circle. So, Mikkel, over to you.
I mean, maybe I'm going to say something a little bit controversial, but I would not, to me, a win would be that was not the question we were asking, because we make this not a financial system problem. I'm actually, this is something that to me was maybe a bit of a controversial statement to make, but I think it was a flawed theory of change when it came with the energy transition or the net zero transition, that finance, by having finance make net zero commitments, finance make transition plans, everything would happen in the real economy. And I think we've realized that that's just not how the world works, right? As I said, finance alone is pushing on a string. So how would we have, are we having these conversations more as how do we drive the system to change? And we're recognizing the right leverage points in the system, because I think finance alone in all instances is not the right leverage point. So having a more sophisticated conversation about where are the system leverage points, which for me often comes with the demand side and not the supply side of the equation.
Thank you. So a rethinking of the theory of change and looking really at the economics of the investment decisions. Thank you. Oliver, please.
Well, I'm a banker. I like closing transactions. So what I would say is success is that in a year's time we have this panel. We spend an hour just talking about things transactions we have closed, and we don't have enough time in that hour to cover every single thing that we want to talk about, because then it means we're just doing this stuff. We're not talking about why we need to do it or how we do it. We're just rolling up our sleeves and getting stuff done.
Okay, well, that's a great challenge and call to action. Iran, please.
I would like to see COP31 in Turkey. By the way, like this will be the biggest hope. Apart from that, like I joined many sessions, different sessions. I think what is missing really is like the governance. Like how we will like it makes economic sense. Like we can make a stronger storytelling and everything. But then yesterday they have been talking a lot about like how this climate change is affecting the health system, how like it's like increasing the health budget of the governments and everything. So like I think we need a little bit more governance on this, like more incentivized structures to make it happen, that we cannot like everything in an hour to tell what we closed this year. So this is the things that I can say.
Thank you, Iran.
Yeah. So I would think in the real economy, if you pardon the pun, I think it should become second nature to invest, the 3% upfront in the upfront costs to deliver that risk reduction. Hopefully that's, gets to your point about changing the mindset. And then since we're in COP, I have to say one COP-linked, hope, which is that the Article 6.4 Supervisory Board recognizes that it needs to balance, conservatism on the nature-based solution methodologies with the reality of the financing needs and the resilience imperative.
Thank you. So there is definitely still a core negotiation element to this that needs to be worked out, and of course, carbon credits a really important channel of finance for emerging markets that can support these resilience goals. So, thank you. Judson,
look, I think my answer is all the above, honestly, but maybe just to add something. I think if we had a broader conversation on such a panel, right, if we had sort of governmental representatives, private sector representatives, and we're talking about the transactions, we were talking about sort of the new collaborations, we weren't making this just a finance sector only conversation, I think that would be a sign that we've matured in our thinking and our approach to this.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's a very clear set of instructions for the invite list for next year. But thank you very much. Yeah, no, challenge accepted. I think this has been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you for all of the insights that you've all shared. And I think one thing that struck out for me is that when we think about integration of different priorities, issues, concept, there's a certain conceptual knee-jerk reaction to that being that, oh no, this is going to be harder, this is going to be more complex, but if anything, what I'm hearing from a lot of this is synergies. And so if we can really focus on that, that's going to drive delivery. We have a need for a shifted mindset. It's going to drive a new theory of change, and ultimately have this discussion around transition, adaptation, nature, and resilience becoming one core conversation between finance and the private sector. So with that, please join me in thanking the panel for this great discussion.
Hello everyone, welcome to our panel. Together with Iram today, we are going to talk a little bit about how we in corporate sectors, financial and non-financial, approach sustainability and what we have done so far, and basically really going to share our experiences with you. I'm Gülsen Ayaz, I'm heading Investor Relations and Sustainability at Turk Telekom, an integrated telecom company in Turkey, which is quite big actually. So Iram, to you.
Thank you, Gülsen. Thanks for the invitation, by the way. It's an honor to be here today. We were discussing before the panel, it took almost like 30 hours to get there, so it's very special to be here right now. İrem Barzilay, I'm also heading sustainability in Garanti BBVA. I started back in 2018 in Garanti, and it was like quite new, like sustainability, sustainable finance. Since then, I'm more concentrated on sustainable finance, how we can innovate new structures for our clients, and also including like Türk Telekom is one of our, best clients. So it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Iram. So let's get started. Irem, I'm going to ask you, how do you approach sustainability at Turk Telekom, at Garanti BBVA, and what is your strategy, and how governance in particular fits into that strategy? What kind of structures and initiatives are you putting in place for that?
Thank you, Gülsen. As I told, like I joined the bank back in 2018, and in that period, maybe like before getting into the our strategy, most recent one, what we have experienced so far is also very valuable. So back in 2018, like as I said, like I joined the sustainability team, and the year later, the team's name changed to Sustainable Finance. And we started to, like work a little more closely with BBVA. Before that, we belonged to another holding, and in 2016, BBVA acquired us in Turkey, like the 50% of the bank's shares, and like we started to work with them. And one of their, like biggest concentration in that period was how we can, like increase our sustainable finance mobilization. We started to work on that, and then like we built a governance team, like because like sustainability is a pretty new topic, and what we have realized is like we don't have much structures or policy documents or governance on that end. So we started to also build that part, and year on year our contribution increased a lot. How we are approaching, like in a recent frame, to sustainability is like we are seeing it's not a risk, but it's a business opportunity for us. So we are trying to, innovate new structures, new products, but on the other hand, also the risk frameworks are very valuable for that, because like banking is somehow pricing the risk. So we need to understand, like from a sectoral perspective, what is like sustainability really means. And also, I do believe that like COVID-19 also like helped us to build that picture in Turkey, because like before that I think like generally people believe that this is kind of a social responsibility, not a business case. But and then like after COVID-19, people started to see the real effect, how when the industry slows down, when the supply chains are slowed down, like we started to see even Marmara see some dolphins. So people started to think like sustainability is a real thing. So we need to innovate, we need to change how we are doing things. So like after that, like we started to see more on like studies of McKinsey, other companies, like this is a real business opportunity. So according to one of the McKinsey studies, like in order to reach to net zero in 2050, we need almost $285 trillion. It's a lot of money, like it's amazing. And when we think that like Turkey represents the 1% of the global GDP, like even our country, like it means in our countries fairly 2 to 3 trillion. So this is like a huge opportunity. So we are trying to, get as much as possible. But on top of it, transition finance, like mitigating the climate change is very important, but also like on top of it, like this just transition, like to inclusive growth, like one of our like main purposes is leaving no one behind. So like on top of climate action, like what we are focusing more on in the recent agenda is to how we can help to build like an inclusive environment in our country. So these are our main, like objectives, how we are shaping around like sustainability around these two pillars. But this is not a separate function, as in Türk Telekom. This is like embedded into our like how we are doing things. It's in our DNA somehow. So like we are trying to increasing the opportunities for our bank, but on the other hand, like aligning the decarbonization of hard to abate sectors are also crucial for us. Long story short, like I can tell that like we are shaping the strategy around like business opportunities, and as you said, like the governance is a huge thing on this. Like our upper management, like CEO, like board of directors, we are starting to discuss these more and more in upper management committees. They also believe that this is a big huge opportunity. So like we built a sustainability committee chaired by our CEO, Like we already appointed someone in our board of directors, like responsible for sustainability related issues. We have some, yearly pledges. It is embedded to our, upper management remuneration processes. So, for example, we are receiving some targets from BBA for sustainable finance. And if we cannot achieve that target, then our, the upper management bonuses are decreasing. So this is a huge thing, at the end of the day. So we are shaping everything around sustainability, plus we strengthen our governance on top of this.
Great, thank you so much. That's very insightful, and I think what you just touched upon is very, very important, the remuneration, because I don't see sustainability any different from your sales and marketing team, IT, legal and compliance, whatever function, it has to be integrated. So if you are rewarding people for the volume of sales they generate, you should be also rewarding them for the sustainability goals they achieve.
Yeah.
So I think that's very, very important as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So,
My turn. So, Gülsen, as representatives of telecommunications sector, how have you positioned your sustainability strategy? What sector-specific factors or inputs have influenced the development of your strategy?
yeah, I think that's something that I'm going to talk about for 5 minutes, but took us 2 years to get to. So it's not easy to do, because you're really, scrutinizing your value chain end to end to capture anything and everything, because you're a large company. We are, by the way, catering 86 million population in Turkey with 4 core businesses and additional sub-businesses. So we have got a lot of impact on our society, on our own employees, customers, environment, and our supplier chain. So that is the end-to-end, strategy that we built. Those are the 5 pillars we identified. Obviously, not just us, but that was also what our stakeholders were telling to us through surveys and all that, materiality analysis, double impact, double materiality analysis were telling us. So the reason for those pillars is, let's start with the customers, right? Anything and everything we do, like you say, we are trying to be a good company, and we are trying to measure our impact. If it is bad, we are trying to mitigate that. If it is good, we are trying to expand that. So anything and everything we do also has got a socio-economic component. We have to be commercial as well, let's face it. So if we do not pay enough attention to customer experience and what we do for the customers, then our business is not going to remain as competitive as the rest of the sector. So that's what we should be really paying attention to in order to, keep the customer experience at the highest level, so that they stay with us for our sustainability. Same for our suppliers, right? We have got fixed line services network. We have got mobile services network. It's really, life saving. Does anyone have got? Does anyone here not have a phone or anything like that? You have got fixed line connections as well. So it's like bread and butter. It's a non-discretionary item for people. So it's something that you should be really, paying attention to. In the sense that you provide the latest technology to the people, so that you can build into that customer experience as well. Therefore, we have to work with the best suppliers in the world in order to make our supplier chain sustainable as well, so that there's no disruption there. People get the latest technology and all that. And also, our employees, we are a big company. We have got 35,000 employees. Again, this has got a lot of angles. You have to keep, you have to be a company that attracts talent in the first place. You have to be able to keep them so that you do not face attrition, because again, that will affect your competitiveness in the market. And also you have to play with the bits and bobs there, because you have to attract women workforce in order to create enough diversity in your workforce. But also, let's face it, Turkey is a young population but an old population. So if you do not mobilize women population into workforce, you're going to suffer from that in the long term as a company. Not just Turk Telecom, every company will suffer from that. So we have to try to attract more and more women into our companies. That's what we are trying to do. And also, I mean, society will look, as I said, I mean, these are non-discretionary and life-saving services, fixed line services and mobile services. And there is this, I mean, study by the technology and technology ministry, and what it looks into is socio-economic development levels across Turkey, and it looks into it in rather granularity. It, I mean, splits Turkey into 943 districts and uses 50 parameters to identify the socio-economic development of different districts. So we looked into this report, and it really ranks the socio-economic development levels of these different districts from 1 to 6, 1 being highest, I mean, in socioeconomic development, 6 being the lowest. So we said, let's look at what we are doing in 5 and 6, the most vulnerable areas, because what we are also trying to do is what we do really, I mean, cycles back to UN SDGs. Are we serving that? So we looked into that, and we found out that actually, I mean, we are the operator that provides by far the largest, I mean, connectivity to those 5 and 6 most vulnerable business districts. And we are trying to, I mean, by looking into that data, we also identified our weaknesses and pain points. So we said, we built a strategy around that, and we said we should be doing more here in those most vulnerable areas. Last but not the least, the climate, of course. I mean, that's very important for us as well, and we have got a very clear strategy there, because as telecom companies, we are not trying to do anything and everything. You cannot, I mean, save the world. You should be trying and focusing on the things that you can create impact the most, and that's where we can be effective in renewable energy, you know, that you're financing that, and energy efficiency. And with that, I mean, I think we have got a 4 years work, and we will have many more in the coming years as well, which saved us about 400 gigawatts energy and 177,000 tons of carbons. So what we do is really, I mean, changing the technology, because let's face it, we are an emerging market, and our number of customers are continuously increasing. So if you try to carry that traffic on your network with old technology, your electricity consumption will grow exponentially. So you have to find ways to mitigate that. And in order to do that, we are investing in renewables, and we are investing in energy efficiency projects, such as, for example, GPON. When you convert the connection from copper to fiber, you can actually save 95% of the electricity that you consume on the network through that technology. And if you, for example, move to next generation equipment in your fixed line network and mobile network, you can create, I mean, again, create a lot of savings in your electricity consumption. So these are the, I mean, this is how we built the strategy, and this is basically, I mean, why we did those, I mean, select those pillars in the first place.
Gülsen, thank you so much. Like, what you are doing is amazing. You know, like, also what you are doing is very special, because, you know, like in Garanti, in our upper management meetings, like we are always telling, like we are everywhere, like, you know, like we have like most retail clients, like we are serving almost like 30% of the Turkey. Like we are in almost every phone in our mobile app. But without the service, we are nothing, you know. Without the service, like you cannot pay anything, you cannot do anything. So like without you, like what we are doing is nothing. And also like what happened in...
well, without you, we are nothing either.
So, you know, like back in April, I think like in Spain, there was a big shutdown. Like they lost the network, they lost electricity in Spain. So we were talking with our colleagues in Madrid. They were getting crazy, you know, because you cannot pay anything, you cannot call anyone. So, I mean, like these are like essential services, and also like the inclusive approach that you are, you know, continue to do. Like it's amazing. Thank you so much for the insights.
Thank you, Irem. And I'm going to move on to sustainable finance, which is now the name of your department. So I want to ask you, I mean, what initiatives are you taking there? What projects are a priority for you? And yeah, what next?
Okay. So like as I told, like in 2018, like the concept of sustainable finance was like a kind of a hot topic. It became a hot topic in our lives. So like green projects, green loans were like only consisting of like renewables. So we were always talking about renewable energy, and in that period we were mainly talking about like hydros, geothermals, like that kind of projects mainly. Then we started to see more projects on wind, solar. But and then like sustainable finance, like the initiatives under sustainable finance also expanded a lot. So last year, like we saw like developments in our country about the green taxonomy. Like we started to understand like this is not only renewable energy financing or energy efficiency. There are many different initiatives underneath of this sustainable finance framework. So we started to saw some movements around like circular economy, like 5G projects from telecom companies. They are very valuable for us. On top of this, like we started to see also like social finance is growing. Like like we are, as you said, like we are in an emerging economy with a growing population. So we need more projects around like health infrastructure, or even electricity distribution projects are like even like counted as social in under some circumstances, in especially under like in the developing regions. So in the recent like times, like we started to see more on like the social side. But also, like we are trying to execute some innovative approaches, like sustainability linked loans, where we are setting some KPIs throughout the maturity of the loans. We are trying to help the companies to reach their targets, because, as you know, the companies generally also like what we are doing in Guarantee. For example, we are putting some interim and also long-term targets. For example, many of our companies have 2030 targets, or like in some cases they have 2050 targets. But what we need to do in a yearly basis, it's like sometimes it's very difficult to set some targets, yearly targets. So we are trying to help the companies to set their yearly targets, yearly ambitions, and bring that yearly ambitions to the like the upper management. Because when you are working with a bank, we are somehow like holding the stick, So like whenever they are not, able to achieve their KPI throughout the loans, the agreement says like if they achieve, incentivize them with a better pricing. But if not, then you need to penalize them somehow. So we are trying to motivate the companies to reach their also yearly targets. And while doing this, we are trying to also provide some, consultancy services, because being part of BBVA Group is somehow like is a kind of an opportunity for us, because BBVA Group is operating more than 30 countries, and they are serving like the biggest companies in that region. So we are like building a valuable know-how. We are trying to understand what is going on also in different regions, in the sectors, how like the players are approaching things, because not everything is public, like of course we have some sustainability reports or even integrated reports, but sometimes like the company's plans are like behind the doors. So I mean, as a bank, I think that our biggest opportunities, we are trying to sneak through the doors and understand like what the real plans are. So we are trying to we are trying to share this know-how with our clients, help them to achieve their yearly targets, and also like help them to understand what's going on in terms of innovation and other best practices. These are our main like approaches like recently. So I'm also curious about like what you are doing in Türk Telekom. In 2024 and in 2025, you executed two significant transactions, a sustainable bond and a green bond, both of which I have been following closely, by the way. From your perspective, what were the key lessons learned throughout the structuring and issuance process? How would you assess the level and nature of investor demand, particularly in terms of pricing dynamics and investor profile?
I think we have been doing what you guys were looking for, you just described, over the last 2 years, so that we got there and we decided to go ahead with sustainable financing. that's really important. I mean, you don't just wake up and say, I'm going to do sustainable finance today. It doesn't work like that. You have to spend serious thinking about it, establish the governance structure, and prepare a roadmap. And that's what we did, really. I mean, Turk Telekom has been proactive in ESG domain for years, but when we put the entire effort under scrutiny a few years back, we thought this is being done in a very uncoordinated way, unmeasurable way, and when you cannot measure the things that you do, then you cannot find what to do next and prepare a roadmap for yourself. So that's when we actually, prepared the strategy, and we created the first time sustainability policy for Turk Telekom. And then we said, this looks great, but needs decision making, action and accountability. And that's when we established a sustainability committee like yourselves, reporting to board of directors. Then we said these are all very nice theoretical documents, but we have to really put this into action. And for that, we created for the first time the sustainability program, which actually, enlists all of the projects in our list and prioritizes them. And actually, it has got an ownership matrix as well, not at the highest level management, at granular level. Everybody is accountable for their own work and progress in sustainability. And we called it annual sustainability program because we monitor the progress there and we discuss why we lagged here and what we need to do next because this project is completed now, etc. So we wanted that to be a live exercise. So once we do that, you create actually a lot of traction in your organization, and then you see those projects which need financing. So you cannot do anything and everything by yourself, your equity. So you go to the investors and tell this strategy. And by the way, investors never judge you for where you are. You may be at the most primitive stage in your sustainability journey. What they are interested in is how sincere you are, that you want to do something, you want to do, finance genuine projects to contribute what we have been talking about. And once you, communicate that strategy, those projects to them, and you can convince them that they are viable projects, they're ready to give you financing for that because, there are a lot of ESG funds out there. Obviously, the mandate is, changing a little bit because of the geopolitical situation in the world at the moment. But that is yet to be seen, right? We shouldn't be discouraged by the fact that some, funds are retreating from ESG alliances, etc. That is yet to be seen if it's a temporary change or there to stay. So we're still watching. So we did the first, sustainable bond, and it was sustainable, i.e. we had both green projects and social projects in our agenda. And those social projects one of them was very unconventional because, it was not something, I think it was the first time we were able to, as a company, put it in the sustainable finance framework, which was the earthquake. Because it's nothing to do with the climate, but it has a social impact. You still have to bring connectivity to those people where you suffered a lot of damage because it was huge in 2023. The earthquake we've seen, it was in a geography as big as a country, as big as Bulgaria. And it affected 10 million people, so we needed financing for that as well. Again, you cannot do anything and everything yourself. You turn to investors and tell them the story, and they usually, get convinced with those, stories. So we did that sustainable bond, and then time flies. This was 24 May, I guess. Then we, also delivered our allocation and impact report. We showed where, each of those dollars of that $500 million we've allocated project by project. And we also studied the impact we created. Just as I told you, we were able to save a lot of electricity and carbon. And we also showed them that in social allocation, which was $100 million, we actually reconnected 250 million people 250,000 people on the fixed line services, and we were able to actually increase the mobile traffic by 194% in the socioeconomically disadvantaged areas. So this is in a nutshell how we did this sustainable. Oh, one more thing. How was the interest from the investors? I think, I mean, we have significantly benefited from the scarcity value when we did the sustainable bond, because it was very rare from Turkish non-financial corporates to go out there. It was actually the first transaction in CEMEA universe. And it was 5 times oversubscribed, so it was very nicely priced for us. But also, I mean, I think, created attraction with the investors. We showed a viable allocation and impact report to them. And this year we were questioning whether we should be going with another, sustainability linked instrument, because the world is changing, and is there still, interest from the investors? We said, let's try. We will not know before we try. And we did the green bond, and again, it was 3 times oversubscribed, and 65% of the allocation was made to medium green and dark green funds, which was very pleasing. So it tells you that investors are still there and willing to finance these projects.
Congress, Gülsen, it's amazing, because also we had a recent issuance. I cannot say similar things, that we got a very interest from the investor side, unfortunately. We did the first, blue biodiversity issuance of Turkey. So it was compared to yours, it was a kind of a tiny deal. It was $20 million. But it was something for us, because as you said, in an emerging economy, it's always good to innovate, because biodiversity is a very fairly new thing in our country. So we pushed a lot. At the end of the day, the green part is somehow tricky, but social part is even more trickier than the green. But on the green side, the biodiversity is the topic mainly we are seeing here, in the Amazons, preserving the forests, or reforestations and afforestation projects, because our BBVA Colombia office did the first transaction, and we learned from them what was the underlying assets, and it wasn't suitable for Turkey because we don't have that kind of projects. But then we started to talk with banks and investors, and we have realized that Mediterranean region is very important to protect, because it's hosting almost one of the biggest regions, that they are hosting many different species of fishes and everything, different species. There is a very valuable region, and it's also the population is growing there. So what we put under this transaction was the tourism, in that region tourism is a pretty diverse activity, and on top of it regenerative agriculture practices and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we learned a lot from that transaction. It means something for us. But as we have discussed, social part is very tricky, because you need to convince the investor what is really vulnerable in your country. Maybe do you want to touch upon how did you complete that process in your issuance?
Well, I hear you. It's not easy, and you have got this, and these are very structured. Processes, right? You're not. You cannot say, this is it. You heard me. Let's do it. It first of all has to go into your sustainable finance framework, which has to be ICMA and LMA compliant. And then there is in order for you to be able to show the investors that this is not only your idea, but it's also scrutinized by a second party, you have to obtain a second party opinion. And in our case, this was S&P, and I cannot tell you, sorry for the language, but it was a very painful process, I must say. Good painful, because you also learn a lot about, what the investors will be asking you, and you're getting prepared for that. It was there was, for example, massive discussions about the 5G technology, whether it is really, green. It is indeed, because, if you try to carry the traffic that is continuously growing, because you guys are each and every day using more and more data, and as that grows, we are using more or consuming more electricity on our network, and as I told you, we have to find the ways to mitigate that. But the SPO provider was really scrutinizing the fact that yes, by the way, it's doubtful that, I mean, yes, 5G is greener because you can carry higher traffic with that. But at the initial stages, because you cannot discontinue your 2G, 3G, 4G networks all at once and move anything and everything to 5G, they were saying that you're not going to create this efficiency immediately. There will be a rebound effect. So, in the first place, your electricity consumption is going to grow, and then perhaps at some point in time, it will decrease. So we have gathered our technical teams to convince them that this is not going to be the case, and we show them our trajectory for them to be convinced. So you have to it's not like, simple discussions. They are very tough discussions. Same for the, socio-economic development and social angle. We had to, and look, emerging markets are not like US and Europe. We are not heavens of statistics information. I hope we will have, or I wish we had better statistical information as to, measuring these impact, but there isn't. So it's more like, sometimes subjective rather than objective. But at the end, we did our homework and we were able to convince those guys as to the essentiality of that financing being provided.
Yeah, as you said, it's like the learning process is huge during this kind of transaction. Even in banking, we are, providing these, products or different, mechanism to our clients. Even in our cases, the learning is still there. Gülsen, I know that this is your turn to ask me some questions, but I'm curious about one more thing. How you are approaching cyber security issues? This is also a very, an emerging topic in your sector. So maybe can you give us little, insights on that?
That's a thrilling topic. It should, when you ask the CEO of a telco company, what makes you not sleep at night, one of the answers should be cybersecurity. And in Turkey's case, the regulatory environment is really interesting and very unique, I must say, very different from other countries. We as Turk Telekom is by far the largest operator of the network, and we actually operate Turkey's network, fixed line services network. And therefore, we have got by far the largest market share in wholesale and retail domain. We have got 15.5 million subscribers. But also, we have got a company, a subsidiary that is called TTI, Turk Telekom International. So that company basically manages the traffic into and outside of Turkey. So you have to really be mindful about data protection here. And I must say, our cybersecurity department is crazy. Crazy. They look anything and everything. Sometimes even as employers, we are like, come on, guy, give me the, access to this. But it's not, because, it happens once, and it is a huge problem of reputation and security for the country. So that's why we are trying to be very mindful about that. One thing that happened very recently in Turkey, and is precious, I think, is that Turkey decided to go GDPR compliant, which is, fantastic. So it was a project. It was a huge project in Turk Telekom. So I think it took us more than 1 year to get all our related, customer data keeping units, subsidiaries, to make them, GDPR compliant. And that project is over now, and we are happy with that.
Amazing, because we are, hearing about cybersecurity issues and everything, day by day, the stories are growing. Even in airports, drones and everything,
it's
cyber,
very sensitive.
it's crazy. I can imagine how, it's a nightmare somehow. For all of us, also for the banking, cybersecurity is the issue, and that team is growing. It's growing really fast because it's very important.
Absolutely,
as you said.
and you banks are, investing in cybersecurity dramatically.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah. So. Your
okay.
question to me.
I'm going to ask you, actually, what are the goals that you are trying to see yourself achieve in the next, 5 to 10 years? And perhaps, you are in a different situation than ourselves because you are keeping track of the goals of the companies, different sectors. Perhaps, you can exemplify a few from there.
Yeah, thank you, Gülsen. It's kind of a complicated topic recently because I had a, chance to also join the climate week in New York. So, in that period also there were some, developments around Net Zero Banking Alliance and everything. So, the sustainable storytelling is, diverging between different geographies. So, US is on another side, Europe, our main shareholders based in the EU, so we are in a completely different angle, and also in emerging market, people are trying to survive. Like when you are trying to survive, no one cares about sustainability at the end of the day, especially SMEs and everything. So the story or targets are a little complicated. But at the end of the day, what we have discussed with our main shareholder BBVA, we are not planning to, stop this business strategy at the end of the day. Sustainability will be one of our main pillars when we are building our strategy. So, as you know, the banking is not we don't have infinite assets. So we need to decide who we should lend, under which circumstances. So, we are trying to grasp the opportunity as much as we can, but while we are also trying to mitigate our contribution to, especially to hard to abate sector, because the Net Zero Banking Alliance shaped around how you will put some targets around hard to abate sectors means cement, steel, aviation, auto manufacturing, and energy, especially the oil and gas upstream. So we are continuing to follow our targets on these sectors. We are trying to, we built some, new initiatives, new calculations in order to understand and in order to assess the appetite of our clients, how they are approaching to transition finance. Because you need to, at the beginning of my speech, I said being inclusive is important, but you need to somehow manage your, energy and also motivation around some clients. So we are trying to assess the appetite of our clients, how they're approaching transition finance, and we are trying to reward some clients when they are building a robust transition plans, and trying to help them with our advisory services, because in BBVA they hired almost 30 to 40 people from the sectors, and we are approaching in each and every sector with a sectoral head coming from that sector, because for telecom you have different things. In steel, they are having different problems or difficulties. In cement, the story is something completely different. So we need to understand from your angle, what you need, how we can approach, or how we should provide our products and services. So we are approaching everything through a sectoral perspective. So, the first thing is to increase our sustainable finance mobilization, and I'm happy to say that since 2018 to, almost to date, we almost mobilized 1 trillion Turkish lira to sustainable finance, which is
I
huge.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. It's a huge, accomplishment. And we investigate, the numbers, solid number means nothing, because we are one of the biggest bank in Turkey. But for example, in last month, we have investigated that in corporate clients and also in the enterprises, almost out of every 4 transaction, 1 is related with sustainable finance. We are growing our portfolio a lot. We concentrated there a lot. But while doing it, we are trying to also mitigate our risk, especially in the hard to abate sector. This is one of our biggest goals, trying to approach things with our yearly ambitions in hard to abate sectors. The other thing is our main impact is coming from lending to our clients, but on top of it, we have also a direct impact. We have almost 26,000 employees, more than I think thousands of different locations with our branches and headquarters and different locations. another goal of ours is, I mean, it's little smaller than our, different like scope 3 impact, but in any case, like another, goal is to decrease our direct impact by 50% in 2030. We are trying to, invest to our branches in order to make them a little more energy efficient, and also to our headquarters. And lastly, like increasing the, like financial literacy of especially the women entrepreneurs. You also touch upon like how important in Turkey to, like attract women into like the job industry and everything in different sectors. We are pretty, lucky in telecom sector and also in banking. Like we see almost 50% of our employees are like women. So like we are pretty, lucky on that. But in different sectors, like we need to increase the women representation. So we are trying to increase also the financial literacy of the women in general, because it comes, everything starts with the, understanding the financial needs and everything. So this is also very important for us. And also like we are trying to support the entrepreneurs and everything. But as I said, like sustainable is shaping everything in our lives right now.
Excellent, and you touched my heart with that women entrepreneurship support that you are providing, because I follow that very closely.
So it's my turn, Gülsen. What are your key sustainable goals, and how do you measure progress towards achieving them? Which projects or initiatives have been prioritized within this framework, and what have been the main challenges you have encountered in implementing them?
Well, I think, we have done some work on taking targets, but sustainability is a long journey. Yeah? That's why we have got 2050 net zero target, and hopefully we will have enough time to do what we are trying to do by then. So we have got, the easier part perhaps with what I've been talking about in a telco company is taking a target in scope 1 and scope 2 emission reductions, and that's 45% in our case by 2030. And we are happy with the progress we've done so far. We have from base year 2020 to 2024 reduced our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 29%, and hopefully we will be able to achieve our target by 2030 with the help of, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the renewables project and energy efficiency projects there. And one of the key projects is the renewables. Again, in Turkey, the energy market is heavily regulated, so you cannot just decide that you will build renewables. You have to really obtain the regulatory approvals. You have to find the large-scale land plot, and you have to get the environmental report for that. So those are the steps that we have been going through, and thankfully we were allocated a capacity of 406 megawatts, and we have completed the first phase of this project, which was 96 megawatts in Sivas district, and that will actually cater 15% of our need, and it will be up and running very soon. Once we complete the 406 megawatts, it will be catering 65% of our needs. This is very important because you're not only achieving carbon reduction, because at the same time you're achieving risk mitigation here. Because, for example, in Turkey, the latest I remember was the skyrocketing energy prices when Ukraine-Russia war erupted. It literally more than doubled in our OPEX, and we had no control on that. And at the same time, we were looking for projects where we would be able to mitigate this risk, but also mitigate our carbon emissions. So this is a crucial project for us. I'm hoping that we will find more renewables projects in the coming future as well. But so far, this is what we have secured, and will hopefully meet 65% of our needs. Apart from that, we have got several initiatives like this energy efficiency projects, but there's also this special, perhaps more niche project I should be talking about, because as a fixed line services operator, we have got a lot of field work. We lay fiber cables on the ground, so it's physical labor heavy process. So for that matter, we have got a huge fleet, more than 10,000 vehicles in our fleet. And we, at some point, want to convert some of that, reasonable portion of that into e-vehicles to reduce our carbon emissions. But it's not easy to do. The e-vehicle market is not doing great recently, and there's not enough incentives out there. And it's always a budget problem, and it's always a prioritization problem. And this is going back to your question, the last part of your question, what are the challenges here? It's the financing and budgeting process and the regulations. Again, there's another project that we are volunteering to do. As telecom companies, by law, we are not mandated to collect consumer electronics. But we know that we have got 56 million customers that we are attached to, and we have got the best sales and distribution network in Turkey. So once we do a large-scale program, we know the huge impact that we can create in a nice way by collecting electronic vehicles, consumer electronics. But the difficulties there are, again, regulatory, because you have to obtain, the approval of the authorities. You cannot go outside the law, even if you want to do that. Because you're not the authorized, entity to do so, you have to really, create the ecosystem to do it properly. And again, going back to the question of data privacy, once you collect those electronic waste, there's a lot of personal data in that, and you have to ensure that you, again, comply with the regulations. So these are the kind of difficulties out there, but we are really working hard to kickstart these projects, because I think those are the renewables and energy efficiency is like our bread and butter. We are very experienced there, and we will continue to produce value there, but it will come to an end at some point. These are the kind of niche projects that we should be excelling into, so that we can, extend our reach for more environmental impact, I think.
Very interesting, and also exciting to hear the collection of the the electronics of your clients. It's amazing. But I totally agree. When you do the renewable projects that you already executed, when you do that kind of things, transition finance comes with resilience also. These are very valuable. In Brazil, we are mainly discussing the nature finance, adaptation, resilience. Everything is hand in hand, by the way. We need to make the story a little bit stronger. We need to, share these, best practices. And also, when we go back, we need to inspire others. I'm sure that you will continue to do that. Should we ask also to our audience if there are many questions? Sure.
Hi, thank you. It's a very insightful event. My question is, you have mentioned earlier that you attract more. You are trying to get more and more women in your company, and in your company there's 50 women in your organization. But sometimes the paradox of gender equity in an organization is sometimes it's becoming superficial. So my question is, how do you make sure that they are genuinely participating, or they have access to the decision making, and you are really bridging the gender pay gap?
Okay, let me start. It's a very valuable question, by the way, because in the entry-level positions, there are 50% of women representations, but are we able to keep them, as you said, until to the decision-making levels? For that, maybe 5 to 10 years ago, we studied this in our company, and as you have said, we started to see a decrease between the levels of the women representation. So we come up with different, programs, after the, maternity leave, how we can, make the woman come back, because, also in our geography, being a mother is a very special thing, this is not, for example, from me, as an example, for example, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, so I'm the first generation of women to in a work environment. So these things are pretty new also in our geography. So with different initiatives, different target setting. For example, even in our board of directors, we have a target to reach the 30% of women representation in our board of directors. These are challenging in our geography, by the way, but we are trying to build different initiatives in order to make the like this representation increase like level by level.
I love the word you selected for that. It becomes superficial. I agree with you. And in Turk Telecom, as the head of investor relations and sustainability, I am not. Thinking that we are doing as much as we should be doing in terms of women empowerment. On the surface, our women employee rate is 43%. When you judge this number by emerging market perspective and Turkey perspective, it looks great. But when you scrutinize into details and look into the number of women in high positions, high management positions and technical positions, it's very low. But genuine, I'm being genuine here. We know our pain points. One of the things perhaps we missed in the discussion of what are the pain points for getting your sustainable strategy working. That is, integrating it throughout a huge organization like Turk Telecom that operates across Turkey with 35,000 employees, both vertically and horizontally. Because, it's not easy to get everyone, combining into the holistic approach to sustainability. For the salesperson, it is the volume of the sales that they generate. So trying to make sure that they have the mentality of understanding the benefits of sustainability objectives in the long term is a long-term process. So we are going to hopefully get there, but it's a slow progress, but it's a worthwhile progress.
I think that's all, right?
I think, thank you so much for being with us. It's an amazing ambience, and please, I will ask you for you to give a great applause to İrem.
Thank you so much, Gülsen. The same applause is also for yours. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Turkish Pavilion. Today we are here to discuss the green financing model for the green projects. And first of all, I would like to thank the Turkish climate team for their well-established organization and participation of our panelists and, of course, your participants. Thank you very much. Today, in these 2 weeks, we are here in Belém to discuss the global targets for climate and, of course, to set some pathways for the future events. As setting global targets, we have to localize it in all our countries. For example, for us, it is 2053 net zero carbon target. So we have to achieve this objective in 2053. Of course, there are many steps or layers for achieving these objectives. However, it is not easy, or it is a very complicated process to achieve all these objectives. Because when we go from planning to implementation, then there is one important challenge we face, and this challenge is financing. Of course, the most important thing, all these climate objectives or climate challenges, the biggest one is, I think, the financing part, because it is not easy to finance our projects. For us, everybody has to do something for combating climate change. Governments, institutions, business sector, and of course, as human beings or citizens, we have to do something. Let me give you an example. For example, I have 2 children, and one of them is 15 and the other one is 11 years old, and I see that they have a very high awareness, because there is a very good campaign in Turkey. All the students in the schools, they are all well educated and well informed about the climate impacts in the schools. So in the point of view, my kids can make contribution for combating climate change. So this is important for localizing. As my country, my team, our climate team spend too much effort. Of course, we have to while we are localizing these efforts, we need everybody's private effort. So on the municipal sector, on the local administration level, or we can say city level, we need our municipalities. In Turkey, the municipalities are responsible for the city level actions like water, sanitation, and urban transportation. So these are the main issues that we need to solve to achieve our net zero carbon targets. Of course, during this pathway, we need to increase the number of financing models. In a traditional way, we can borrow from an institution or we can borrow to the municipality so they can make the investments and make the implementation or the construction. And after that, they will start to operate these operations in their cities. The traditional way is the easiest way because everybody is aware and everybody is know what to do in the traditional way. However, there are many ways to finance our projects. Waiting a traditional way doesn't make much sense. But as you know that now we are discussing the carbon emission trades and we are talking about the bonds for municipalities, green bonds, and now we are going to discuss green sukuk. This is an Islamic finance model. So, as İlbank, our responsibility is financing the municipalities in Turkey, my institution. Beyond these efforts, we are guiding the municipalities and we are supporting the municipalities in the technical way. The reason is the municipalities' capacity. It is not easy to build a capacity. It is a very expensive way, both physically and financially. These are expensive ways to increase the capacity. So there is a municipal bank as my institution, İlbank, and there is a capacity, and we are using this capacity to mobilize the finance to our Turkish municipalities. Of course, the next step will be we go beyond our borders and to do this job internationally, but it's not the time. We are working on it. So we are borrowing these municipalities. We are borrowing from World Bank, EBRD, Islamic Development Bank, JICA, etc. There are many institutions, so we can borrow and we can directly mobilize it to the municipalities. This is the easiest way. However, now we are increasing, we are finding new ways to finance our projects. So, Islamic financing model is one of this model, and sukuk is a Sharia compliance financing instrument, and there is no interest payment at the end. There is a rental payment or income sharing or profit sharing. By the way, there are some advantages to use these sukuk models. For example, as you know, especially in the Gulf region and in the South West region, there is a very high capital in the Islamic finance. So to mobilize it to our projects, then we can offer these investors our sukuk model. And the second one is this sukuk model based on asset. There must be an asset, otherwise it doesn't proceed. So this is the guarantee. This is the other advantage of this sukuk method, and of course this is an ethical and green financing model for our municipalities. Today, one of our largest metropolitan municipality Maybe you know Mevlana in Turkey. So this is the city of Mevlana, and they have a very strong capacity, and they are aware of the future needs and challenges. So to achieve these challenges, they have some models, and this model is one of an important model, and it's a very best practice for all of us. So I would like to give the floor to my colleague from Konya Metropolitan Municipality. But before giving floor to him, there is a video, and by the way, you have some information and awareness about the city of Konya.
Buzullar eriyor, mevsimler kırıyor, felaketler artıyor. Biyolojik çeşitlilik ve gıda güvencesi tehlike altında. Milat öncesi 7400'lerden bu yana birçok medeniyete ev sahipliği yapmış bir şehir, Konya. Şimdi ise 2 milyona aşkın nüfusa sahip. Konya Büyükşehir Belediyesi olarak Konya'da yaşayan vatandaşlarımızın yaşam sorumluluğunu üstlenmiş durumdayız. İklim değişikliğinden en çok etkilenen bölgelerden biri olan kentin kapalı havzalarında su kaynakları çekiliyor. 50 yıllık yağış ortalaması düşüyor, sıcaklık ortalamaları yükseliyor. Türkiye'nin ilk iklim şurasına ev sahipliği.
Okay, so now I will give the floor to the colleague from Konya Metropolitan Municipality. He will give the example for the green financing method for Sukuk, and this modality will work, and it's based on asset, and this asset is a solar power plant, which was under construction now, and they're expecting to complete it in this 8 months time. After the completion, they can issue green sukuk, and by the way, they will provide finance from the international donors or international investors. So it will be a very good example, and I think this is the first in the world, and we will now listen the presentation of Konya. Mustafa Bey.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum. Öncelikle bu nezaket... Ses nasıl? Şu an iyi mi? Evet. Çok teşekkür ediyorum katılımınız için. Öncelikle nezaketinden dolayı Altuğ Başkanıma ayrıca teşekkür ediyorum. Biz Konya'yı tanıtmak istersek, Konya Türkiye'nin en büyük yüz ölçümüne sahip bir şehridir. 42 milyon metrekarelik bir yüz ölçümüne sahip, 2 milyon nüfuslu, yaklaşık olarak 49 milyar TL'lik bir bütçemiz vardır. 1 milyar doları aşan bir bütçemizden bahsediyoruz. Biraz önce Altuğ Bey'in de söylemiş olduğu finans modellerine ulaşırken zorlandığımız süreçler oluyor yerel yönetimler olarak. Bunu nasıl en aza indirilebiliriz sürecinde bir modelleme çalışmasıyla başladık. Ben öncelikle nasıl bir projemizin olduğunu anlatacağım. Projemiz 70 megawatt GES projesi. Konya Büyükşehir Belediyesi ve Su İdaremiz KOSGİ'nin toplam tükettiği yıllık güneş enerjisini biz Dünya Bankası, İller Bankası aracılığıyla ihalesini yaptık ve şu an inşaat çalışmalarımız devam ediyordur. Burada 31,5 Konya Büyükşehir, 38,5 KOSGİ, 2023 yılında bağlantı çalışmaları imzalanmış. 2024 yılında çevre sosyal yönetim planları ÇSYB ve paydaş katılım İller Bankası, Dünya Bankası tarafından onaylanmıştır. Burada alanımızı görüyoruz. Yaklaşık olarak 2 milyon metrekare arazi üzerine kurulacaktır. 168 bin adet güneş paneli yer alacaktır projemizde. Yılda 140 milyon kilowatt saat elektrik üretmesi planlanmaktadır. Bir örnek verecek olursak 58 bin hanenin elektrik ihtiyacını karşılamış olacaktır. Ve bununla beraber tüketilen elektriğin tamamını termik santrallerden üretildiğini kabul edersek inşa edilecek güneş enerjisi projesi sayesinde yılda 135 bin ton karbondioksit salımı engellenmiş olacaktır. Şimdi Dünya Bankası ile yapmış olduğumuz projenin sonrasında biz 3 yıldır yaklaşık olarak sukuk modeli UNDP ile beraber İller Bankası, UNDP, Emlak Katılım Bankası ile beraber yeşil sukuk sürecine başladık. Yeşil sukuk nedir? Altyapı projelerinde finansman sağlamak için yapılandırılmış ve varlığa dayalı bir finansman aracıdır. İslamidir tamamen. Şeriati sistemdir. Faiz yoktur. Yenilikçi bir üründür. Bu dünyada ilk yerel yönetimlerde gerçekleşecek olan bir sukuk modelidir. Daha öncesinde İslami finans pazarında devlet sukunu, Endonezya özel sektör sukunu Malezya tarafından gerçekleştirmiş olup Türkiye olarak yerel yönetimler üzerinde yapılmış ilk sukuk ihracı olacaktır. Ay sonunda sukuk ihracına çıkmış olacağız. Süreçte şöyle anlatırsak tahville yeşil olmayan veya yeşil olanlar arasında birinde geleneksel yatırımcılar vardır. Yeşil tahvilde geleneksel yatırımcılar ve geleneksel yeşil yatırımcılar bulunmaktadır. Sukukta geleneksel yatırımcılar, İslami yatırımcılar varken yeşil sukukta tüm yatırımcılar katılabilecektir. Burada rol model olarak Konya Büyükşehir Belediyesi bu sukuk ihracını gerçekleştirdiği zaman diğer ülkelere de örnek modelleme olarak sukuk ihracıyla yeşil projelere finansman sağlamış olacağız. Sukukla tahvili karşılaştıracak olursak tahvil faiz sağlar. Sukukta kar payı getirisi vardır. Faiz yasaktır. Tahvilde herhangi bir şer'i prensip veya kanun aranmaz. Sukukta İslami finans prensiplerine uyum aranır. Tahvil teminatsız bir borçlanma aracıdır. Sukuk teminatlı bir yapıya sahiptir. Bu da tahvil alacakları, sukuk ihracından faydalanmak isteyenleri bir teminat noktasında da güvence altına almaktadır. Tahvilci ikincil marketi daha geniştir. Sukukun ikincil marketi daha sınırlıdır. Proje kapsamında kuruluşların rolü, bu projeye dediğim gibi Birleşmiş Milletler UNDP Türkiye ofisiyle başladık. 3 yıl oldu. 3 yıl boyunca yerelde çıkarılabilecek bütün kanun mevzuat hususunda gerekli çalışmaları yaptık ve şu an ihracı yaklaşık 15 gün sonra ihraca çıkmış olacağız. Burada Birleşmiş Milletler yeşil çerçeve geliştirme ve ikinci taraf görüş ve etki raporlaması konusunda mali ve teknik desteği sağlamıştır. Konya Büyükşehir Belediyesi yükümlü olmuştur. Emlak Katılım Bankası ihracı aracı finansal kuruluşu olmuştur. Emlak varlık kiralama ihraççı olmuştur. Hazine ve Türkiye İl Bank Konya Büyükşehir Belediyesi'nin sukuk ihracı için garantör olmuştur. Türkiye'de bu ihraç süreciyle ilgili ekleyebileceğim SPK ile sürecin nasıl yürütüldüğüyle ilgili GES yapım ihale sürecimiz bittikten sonra Emlak Katılım Bankası SPK ile gerekli görüşmeler yapılmış. İhraç süreci içerisinde tamamlaması gereken evraklarla ilgili süreç başlamış olup ilgili kurumlara istenilen belgeler sunulmuş olup ve hukuki durum raporu hazırlanmış, yatırımcılar ile toplantı yapılma aşamasına gelmiştir. Şu an oran, vade ve ödeme ile ilgili ihraçta sürecimiz devam edecektir. Bu da Dünya Bankası sürecinin başlamasından sonra 100 milyon TL'lik bir ihraç gerçekleşecek olup bu ihraçta bu projemizin depolama alanını, yani mevsimsel güneşlerin geliş açılarına göre her mevsimde toplayamayabileceğimiz kapasiteyi artırabilmek için bu süreçte bir depolama tesisi kullanıyoruz. Bu depolama tesisiyle beraber de tam verimli bir şekilde güneşi depolamış olacağız.
Okay, thank you, Mustafa Bey. I understand that you have a double win. So you finance this project with the traditional way, which you borrow from the World Bank via İlbank, and you make the implementation and the construction. And with this implementation, you will issue this sukuk. So this means you will double the profit for Konya Metropolitan Municipality. So it's a good example. As we expressed, there are many global goals to achieve, and on the city level, we have to achieve these levels. So to achieving these objectives, we need finance, and a traditional way is not a way. So sukuk is a good example. It is an attractive way for receiving Islamic finance to our country and our project. And of course, this is almost a guarantee because it's an asset-based financial instrument. During his presentation, Mustafa Bey told that there is a guarantee mechanism by Treasury and İlbank. This is not about this sukuk Islamic finance, I think, and this is the obligation of Turkish legislation. So there's nothing to do, but it's already has its own guarantee. So it's a good example. So I would like to thank Mustafa Bey for this valuable presentation. If is there any question, I would like to give the word to the floor. Okay, so thank you for coming, and Mustafa Bey, thank you for your kind presentation. We are very well informed about this unique project. We hope that you will be successful, and we will see the outcomes maybe in the next session or in another panel. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for your coming. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Please do sit down, and we'll start in just a moment. Okay, I think we should kick off. So thanks everyone for joining us for our panel here hosted by the Institute of International Finance, of course graciously hosted by the Turkish Pavilion, which is focusing on strengthening financial architecture for sustainable development and climate impact. This session will address how a changing global macroeconomic landscape and political environment is affecting the development finance agenda and what that means for private financial institutions, with a particular focus on sovereign debt, national policy frameworks, and of course, blended finance. And from the perspective of the IF, which is based in Washington, D.C., we have seen, of course, an environment of increasing fragmentation, declining ODA, tighter microfinancial conditions, and of course, steadily increasing climate damages, the key focus here in Belém. And all of these can affect how emerging market countries are able to access capital, their cost of capital, and really brings the question of adaptation finance into focus as a really key priority. Many of these issues that are facing emerging markets, and this is one of the key takeaways that I'm seeing here at COP, is that these questions around climate exposure, debt sustainability considerations, and cost of capital are really closely interlinked. And resolving these requires an integrated response. And that's why it's great to have a panel from across the financial sector with us today. We have Dana Barsky, Global Head of Sustainability Strategy and Net Zero for Standard Chartered. Veronica Chow, Global Co-Lead for Catalytic and Blended Finance at BCG. Also got the memo on having an orange dress. I did not get that memo, but I do have an orange tie. Miri Duron, Managing Director for Global Sovereign Credit at Moody's, and Marcus Muller, Chief Investment Officer for Sustainability at Deutsche Bank Private Bank. So I'd like to start off with a kind of opening, I think it's inappropriate to say icebreaker here, maybe a cooling, refreshing question for everyone. Just on what's brought you to COP and your views on developments so far, what this sort of means to you as we're halfway through. So maybe Dana, I'll start with you.
So at Standard Chartered, I run, I think, a very unusual group. We've got what we call our innovation hubs, and they're thematic hubs that are really focused on driving and mobilizing capital into different thematics. Those are adaptation finance that you mentioned, blended finance, carbon finance, nature finance, and we've just added one on circularity and circular economy. And so I'm very much here to work with MDBs, with governments to try to create opportunities to mobilize private capital alongside MDB capital in some cases into climate finance and transition finance. I also run the Net Zero program, and so I'm very much here to work with corporates to think about how they transition. And so I think to your question of how is it going, I mean, I am always focused on implementation. Very much at our firm, we've not only, have completed our target setting, but we are very focused ourselves on implementation. And it's hard. And so coming off the back of the announcements, I think it really is critical to focus on now getting some of these transactions over the line. So I'm happy to see that focus here at COP.
No, thank you. And of course, this question of implementation, maybe it's not a COP of really major headline numbers or things coming in. Of course, we've seen the major announcement of the TFFF, a great success. But this focus on implementation and delivery against goals in the COP process is, of course, very relevant for financial sector strategy. So the negotiations on adaptation definitely interesting in that context. Veronica, over to you. What's brought you to COP?
Absolutely. Great to see you all here. My name is Veronica Chow. So we're here also to support the action agenda. BCG has a team that's been supporting the presidency in curating a number of commitments and action-focused elements to drive the agenda forward. There's a lot that can be done with the decisions already made. And so we've been working to help the presidency, in particular on the finance action agenda, noting things like advancing transition plans for financial institutions, advancing the interoperability of sustainable finance taxonomies, advancing things like country platforms or other ways of aggregating pipeline into larger scale ticket sizes. So these are the kinds of things that we've been working to really shape that action agenda. And it's great to see the attention that action agenda has gotten. For those of you who haven't looked at it yet, do take a look. There's 114 different solutions across finance and 6 other thematic areas that show that we can start to move today. Regardless of what happens in the negotiations, there's a lot that can be done today.
Excellent. Do you want to come in?
Just to make it a little interactive, I think one other thing you touched on, which is country platforms. We're really starting to see the emergence of the importance of country platforms, and I think that's really critical to implementation and really moving things in a holistic way.
Excellent. No, thank you so much. And maybe that's already, in the first minute or two, a key take-home from this discussion. We have the tools, we have the infrastructure that we can work with, and as we've seen the report of the Circle of Finance Ministers, the Baku to Belém roadmap, highlighting a number of those policy-related actions, particularly relating to taxonomies, adaptation finance. So great to see that you're already working with the industry on what that looks like for them. Marie, please, what's brought you?
No, thank you, and hello everyone. Great to see you all. Really, the purpose of coming here to COP for Moody's, and I had, as you said, the Sovereign and Multilateral Development Bank rating team, is really to listen, learn, explain, engage. And I'll go in a bit of detail on all of that. So as rating agency, we assess credit risks, and climate risks are relevant to credit risks. Certainly in my sectors, sovereigns and MDBs, we see the relevance and the tangible relevance of physical climate risk, transition risk, nature, water. The listening and learning part is because when we assess these climate risks in our credit ratings, we look at not only the exposure, but also the resilience, what a government will do, for instance, to mitigate, to reduce the impact of natural disasters, to recover faster. And so that's really, forums like COP are really useful, especially a COP focused on implementation, really useful to get a better sense of what is tangibly happening on that resilience piece. So I agree, country platforms, as well as different financial structures that have been announced prior to or during COP, Reinvest Plus, Eco-Invest in Brazil, and so on and so forth, really useful for us to do that. The explaining and engaging part is that we're here, we want to make really our assessment as accessible and transparent as possible. And we understand that climate risk can be quite complex on its own, and then when it's about integrating climate risk into credit risks, that can be difficult to really to grasp. So we're here, this panel here today and other various events have been really a very good opportunity to engage with different stakeholders, with different parts of different audiences, to see where is our analysis clear, where is it understood, where is this further work to do for us in terms of driving awareness and engaging on these topics. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, and definitely we'll want to dive into some of the points you were just mentioning on how you're accounting for resilience in the context of your ratings perspectives and over the course of the panel. So stay tuned for that. Marcus, please. What's brought you to come?
So maybe when you see Deutsche Bank, private bank, you're wondering why private bank? Why is a private bank here? It's very simple. So I'm heading also the Nature Advisory Panel of Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank is the only global bank which has such a Nature Advisory Panel in order to understand how to incorporate nature into our decision-making processes, be it on the enterprise risk management side as well as on the investment or financing decision side. And we are one of the last remaining universal house banks with private bank, corporate bank, and investment banking. Without a strong private bank, you can't lend money to your clients. And this is exactly the reason why we are here. We have a very clear transformation framework, transition framework across 8 sectors with Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emission reduction goals. This is something what we are discussing here with our clients. The second pillar is why we are here. We have a clear sustainable finance target goal of 500 billion by the end of this year, and we are almost there. So we have reached over 450 billion already. And of course, we want to build a further pipeline, right? So this is really going on, and being here discussing with our clients, this is exactly the goal. And last but not least, talking about the way of how we can support changing business models, but also transforming business models, and not just of corporates, but also of countries. Two examples. One example was a 500 million size Benin debt for impact swap, not nature swap, impact swap, because a country of Benin can use then the proceeds for its own development strategy, which is very important when we talk about adaptation as well as mitigation. And then the other thing is we just signed a letter of intent with Suriname and Honduras on delivering with other German corporations a set of high integrity carbon credits in order to protect the rainforest nations, but also to give an income stream to the stewards of our global commons.
No, thank you so much. And that definitely speaks to one of the themes that we're going to be highlighting here, which is this need to, of course, innovate at pace, but really balance this priority of meeting the urgency, using new tools, and applying existing tools in new ways. I think that's been another theme that has really come out from a lot of the discussions so far. So in this session, we want to take a rather broad view of the term financial architecture. And of course, we want to talk about international financial architecture in terms of the roles and mandates of multilateral financial institutions, standards, regulatory authorities, and what's governing the financial system. We also want to look at market architecture, as we've just heard, in terms of instruments and investment vehicles, particularly relevant for emerging markets, blended finance as well, and the architecture of the capital stack, thinking about how public and private sources are coming together and the mechanisms in which they're supporting climate and development impact. So maybe to kind of set the scene, take a look from the global perspective, Maria, I can start with you. This has been a year of course, great disruption within the global economy, disruptions to the trading system, geopolitical constraints, tensions, ongoing conflict, etc. And I think in this environment, we're seeing this debate on international financial architecture reform, which we've been talking about at COP for some years, really taking on new urgency. And there have been a number of points throughout the year, including the Finance for Development Conference, where this has really come into focus, particularly this issue of emerging market cost of capital. So looking across the multilateral system, where do you see progress, if any, and how might the outcomes from COP factor into this whole debate?
Yeah. As you said, that topic of international financial architecture is very, very broad and has taken really different streams, if you want, from really how to make the process of debt restructuring for sovereigns more effective and efficient, to questions around the cost of capital for low-income countries and emerging markets. What are the causes of that high cost of capital, and what are potential solutions? To as well, and particularly relevant to really the COP here today, how multilateral development banks, organizations like the World Bank, the African Development, the Inter-American Development Banks, really maximize the use of their resources to promote development. And these reflections have been ongoing for some time, taken by the G20 initially, with a very clear and strong message to multilateral development banks, I'll call them MDBs, to really do more with less, or do more with the same. With the resources that they have, the financial resources that they have, how can they increase essentially their lending? And we've seen MDBs across the board really responding to this call and accelerating that response, really accelerating. So giving you a few examples, the Asian Development Bank has secured portfolio guarantees from some of its shareholders. So independent of where the losses are in the Asian Development Bank's portfolio, some shareholders are guaranteeing or are paying essentially on behalf of the borrower. That reduces the risks for the ADB of its own portfolio. That allows it to then frees up some capital, allows it to lend more. So they receive portfolio guarantees of around $2.5 billion, which they're going to leverage to lend an extra $10 billion. Other example would be the African Development Bank that issued hybrid capital. Multilateral development banks have had quite simple, if you want, capital structures so far. And now they're looking at using different tools that commercial banks have used for quite some time to, again, be more nimble, more agile, to really be more flexible, if you want, with what their shareholders or creditors can offer. So AFDB was the first one to issue hybrid capital, and we've seen interest from others. Our contribution in these examples are really to explain what are the credit implications for the MDB for hybrid capital, how much of that is equity-like and hence bumps up the capital of the MDB, and how much of that do we consider debt? The portfolio guarantees, how much does that reduce the credit risks? We've seen a whole range of other measures. I'll just mention one last one. Securitization is gathering really a lot of interest. MDBs have typically been originating lending, and now they're looking at originating and distributing. And we're seeing different structures really put together in different ways, but again with that idea of doing more with the resources they have. So I think that's, to me, the MDB's interpretation of really the implementation that they're really answering this call. And again, as credit rating agency, we're there to explain, and you will see that in our publications, what the credit implications are from all of this.
No, thank you so much. And it really interesting that notion of cross-pollination of business models between private financial institutions, those structures, how they could be applied within the public sector, and then reverse, of course, the products that can enable more private sector capital to come in. And also, I think this general movement we're seeing towards originate to distribute, SRT transactions, securitization, of course, really positive to be able to do more with less and basically stretch capital for as long as possible and apply it to other use cases. Veronica, maybe I can turn to you for a perspective on some of these questions. I mean, we're, of course, seeing a very dynamic international environment. We're also hearing a lot about some of these persistent asymmetries, particularly relating to the difference between real and then perceived risks, how we understand this, that are affecting investor appetite and capacity to invest in emerging markets. So when thinking about the different levers here, whether that would be policy, market instruments, data, regulatory reform, what's needed to perhaps catalyze a shift? What's making you most excited?
Terrific. Well, one of the things I love about COP is you can just stumble into a session and learn something. So yesterday, I stumbled into a session done by some of the planetary science booth, where some analysis was done that ranked countries by risk and vulnerability, and then showed the share of adaptation finance that is flowing to those countries as a derivative of their vulnerability. So surprise, surprise, the countries that are the most vulnerable are getting the least finance. Okay, and so that gets me thinking, given who we are, which are people who are shaping the financial architecture, how do we start to rewire that financial architecture in ways so that this money can go to where it's needed? And actually, Maria, I'm so curious. I'm going to ask you a question to come at some point. But like, as we think about risk, right? Like, how can we start to reward countries for abating their risk? But I'll let you think about that in a sec. So we at BCG, we've actually done a report recently with the World Economic Forum. It just came out to try and answer this question for one use case, which is adaptation. Financing things like coastal abatement, financing things like flood prevention, which don't necessarily have the cash flows against which normal financing requires, but still plays a huge role. And your question about levers, well, unfortunately, there's no one particular. It's all of the above. So we need governments to have very clear and consistent policy and regulatory environment to give investors that faith and conviction that they'll get their money back. We need local delivery capacity. I think what's different about adaptation versus mitigation is it's so inherently local. And again, what investors, and we have two bankers here, what they're looking for is, are they going to get their money back? And unless that local capacity and local communities being really on board and in support of these projects, we won't get there. Data becomes really interesting. We actually worked with the city of Lagos to take their data to understand physical risks from a city level. For those of you who have been to Lagos know it's huge and sprawling. down to individual parts of that city. And what we were able to do with that much more localized data is identify the best ROI for Lagos of where it can do those investments. So data really matters. And then, of course, financing mechanisms, right? So some of these transactions just have very different cash flows, very different risk profiles, and yet we're seeing really interesting innovation. So, for example, in Singapore, some real estate developers are able now to monetize the increase in asset value that accompanies having that kind of more resilient flood protection around it. We're also seeing things like the monetization of be it carbon or other sorts of credits. You mentioned nature. The nature-based credits, I think, could be a real unlock here. So I guess the answer is all of the above, which to me is exciting because, again, at a COP like this, and I see our audience, probably every one of you is working on a different part of this problem. And so I think that's what we really need to do is all just keep chipping away at it.
No, thanks so much for highlighting that example of how to monetize adaptation and resilience benefits. And in the panel we had earlier this morning, focusing very squarely on that question, the one consistent message that was coming across was the need to rethink investments in resilience not as a cost, but as a long-term financial gain, the preservation of value. So,
can I quickly add to this? So, I have also a little bit of an economist in myself because I studied this many moons ago. If I think about resilience, then it means from an economic definition the following. Resilience means that nature and society/economy has a capacity to endure shocks. But how to endure shocks if you don't work on the mitigation? Because the enduring capacity for shocks we need to preserve, which just can happen through mitigation. And then in the middle between these two poles is adaptation towards a change. And I just can warn everyone, I agree completely with Veronica about what she said, but at this COP, I just can warn about forgetting mitigation. Mitigation is the prerequisite for being able to adapt. Without mitigation, we never ever will be adapting because it would be the same as if you would be sick because of smoking, just treating your disease without stopping smoking. So we have to stop to smoke in order to treat the disease we have.
Great. I hope they are basically piping in the audio from this panel into the plenary rooms where they are discussing the debate around whether or not to revisit the issue of fossil fuel phase down and following up on agreements at Dubai.
Yeah, maybe to put a few numbers, fully agree with you. I think the focus on adaptation in this COP has come because I think mitigation is showing it's happening. About more than $2 trillion of investment every year in the last few years. I was earlier on a panel where the International Energy Agency was, again, giving these numbers. It still needs to double. So there's still definitely not there on mitigation, as we know, but it is happening. Adaptation, there's about 1/10 of the needs happening currently. So I think that's where really the differences are coming from. And for what I heard as well is that the financial challenges in adaptation are really of a scale that is quite different from those of mitigation. So
no, that's a really key point. And if we look at the data from IEA in terms of spending, but also in terms of generation, not only what's being put in place in terms of physical assets, but actually what's coming through to end energy uses, the net increase in energy demand is being met almost completely by renewables. So of course we're not at a point at which there's going to be a sudden shift away from fossil fuels, but this incremental increase over time will lead to fossil fuels leaving the system purely almost on cost considerations. So important to be keeping that in mind. Marcus, maybe I can turn to you for a thought on your clients, how they're seeing this. How do you see investor interest in climate and development finance changing in response to this global landscape? Are people getting scared off? Are people leading in? What are you seeing? Where's the committed capital still?
So, of course, we have seen during the last quarters a shift. So we have seen a shift from private investments, which was really mainstream accepted into sustainable or ESG solutions, towards now more the complex and professional money, which means ultra high net worth individuals or institution or semi-professional. Because the retail investors or the affluent investors have been scared about uncertainty about what it is really, what it says. And we know that capital markets in generally like risks and the reward for risk, but doesn't like uncertainty. So this is a pernickety discussion, I guess, about these two differences. But if it's uncertain, investors are shying away and waiting. But professional investors, big money, ultra net worth individuals, they see already the growth potential, exactly because of the shift through the mitigation, through what you have been saying. Because in the end, what we are giving money for as investors is growth. The world is designed to grow, to change. Whatever we eat in the morning or in the evening, it has been growing somewhere. We are putting our money on the cash account not for depreciation, at least for maintaining its value or even growth. We are getting money for our work, which is a part of growth. So, and complex money understands exactly that the money is needed for supporting growth so that we also can further prosper in future, be it through mitigation, adaptation, but we need to keep this growth potential in check, that we can still use capital markets for getting money for taking risk. So, to be honest, I think it is getting better in the mood of being part of this solution. Clients really want to change, especially clients who are thinking about the future.
Well, thank you. That's a positive note. And on this question of uncertainty, perhaps one of the global trends that is systemic in terms of its implication across the economy and where we have the least uncertainty is the outlook for climate damage. And so the more that we can think, more so than what we can think about in terms of inflation, geopolitics, and all of these other factors that are really giving a lot of noise into the rest of these signals. So good to keep bringing that home, and great to hear that people want to be supporting this. Dana, over to you. One of the things that, of course, is coming up in many, if not virtually all of the discussions here in Willem is blended finance. We've already heard about a number of the new initiatives in this space, and we'll have a number of questions on blended finance, but maybe you can help kick us off here. How are you approaching this space as a global bank, and where are you seeing the most interesting opportunities?
So, Standard Chartered is a leader in blended finance, according to external parties like Convergence. But our history in that really comes from, I would say, a focus on bankable projects and bringing MDBs into specific projects, I'd say, over the last 10 years. But I think what's changed, and Veronica mentioned this, and I think it also goes a little bit back, Marie, to your earlier kind of question of how do we ensure we're bringing the capital to where it's most needed, which is, I think, I've seen a shift over the last year towards much more holistic views, be it country platforms, or really thinking about, from an MDB perspective, with the limited capital that I have, with the limited guarantee pool that I have, where can I make the most difference? As opposed to being reactionary, being proactive. And I think that's really making a huge difference and a huge shift. And the fact that a firm like ours is even able to have a group that's now called Blended Finance Programs that thinks on a thematic basis as opposed to being reactive, and develop the markets and bring in the MDBs as needed and work closely with the MDBs, I really think that's going to change and create a much more robust pipeline of bankable projects that are not one-off, and really think about how to change that equation for many countries. I mean, I'll give you just one example. We announced a private sector-led platform for the country of Lesotho. It's a small country that's landlocked within South Africa. And, they were losing their brightest people for jobs, in different countries. They're leaving the country. And at the same time, they were importing oil and gas, importing energy. And through a collaboration with the private sector, with public sector, with philanthropies, with governments. We're really working to think about how can we change the entire country such that they're going to be a net exporter of clean energy, which creates jobs, and it's going to really be, drive dramatic change in this country. I'm really excited about this country platform.
No, thank you, and that is perhaps a good segue to Veronica, considering that you're working across so many different parts of this capital stack, across this value chain, origination to structuring. How are you seeing some of the key unlocks that could enable the objectives that you were just discussing in terms of, quite substantial shifts in how governments are approaching the transition as a job creation imperative, and how does this align with the other end when we're looking at the demand side, or excuse me, the supply side of capital that wants to be moving towards impact? So maybe just some thoughts on what you see as some of the, again, going back to perhaps this question of levers, what are you seeing as the most impactful opportunities in that space?
Yeah, so on this topic of blended finance, just to clarify what we're speaking to, it's this notion of alongside commercial capital that often requires a certain compensation for risk or a minimum level of return, or has other constraints, is applying certain forms of capital that can either absorb that risk, enhance the returns, or provide other accommodations, maybe making the money last longer, etc. So that's what we're talking about. And I think what's been encouraging is after a period of somewhat tepid growth, we're starting to see larger ticket of these transactions that's mobilizing greater share of institutional money. But there's an and. To me, the and or the but is all of that unlocking requires that scarce, flexible, catalytic capital that's willing to take that risk. Sometimes it wants the higher returns, sometimes it doesn't, but it's that catalytic money that is often proving to be the hardest, scarcest ingredient right now. Now that some of the larger institutional investors are starting to see the merit in these transactions, now it's that scarce catalytic. And you mentioned in the private bank, high net worth, philanthropies, we're really excited about the extent to which we can start to bring in other actors into this space. We've seen development finance institutions, some parts of them. We've seen governments start to put some of this money forward. The question is, can we bring others into this party, be it philanthropies, high net worths, etc. So that's one key unlock, is bringing more actors into this space.
Insurance companies as well. Yeah. Nope, that's it.
Okay, insurance companies was also mentioned, which I think adds. And I think there's been, again, some great transactions where AXA in particular has provided some really great products that help to unlock it.
No, indeed. And also seeing some of the innovations around I believe it's the Insurance Resilience Development Fund developed by the IDF that's trying to draw in insurance sector capital into this space.
But if I quickly may add to this, so we see, although in all pockets, so what do I mean with pockets? So for every problem, there is a different financing solution. So, and we discussed it last year in Baku as well, during your breakfast. So blended finance, although I love it, it's not the panacea for everything, right? So we need to be very clear for which problem we are using what kind of solution. And secondly, we need to educate our own staff to do the right anamnesis with our clients. Right? And then the clients also need to get on this knowledge journey. I'm working on a BNG project right now, very exciting, but this is also an education exercise for all sides involved. Because if there is a law, it doesn't mean necessarily that the potential off-takers do exactly know what to do to be compliant with the law. And there we can, as banks or as financial institutions or other institutions, really be part of the solution in order to discuss, advise, take them on as early as possible in order to find the right tool for achieving the right goal.
No, thank you. And many dimensions of this whole blended finance debate come down to de-risking, measures that can be relevant for de-risking in emerging markets. And Marie, maybe I can turn to you and picking up that theme you were mentioning before on the relationship between adaptation and resilience investments and ratings, debt sustainability. How are you approaching these factors in your analysis, and what's the relationship between sovereign ratings and corporate ratings in this context, recognizing that, of course, there are many levels at which capital needs to be allocated across the economy to support resilience goals?
Yeah. And maybe I can take Veronica's question earlier as part of that. So, as mentioned at the beginning, as rating agency, we include climate risks in our assessment of sovereign ratings, for instance. And that's an assessment of exposure and then an assessment of resilience, what is being done. I'll mention a few numbers and give an example. So because what is being done is assessed in relation to what needs to be done as well. That's really to measure whether this is really tangible. For a country like Brazil, the climate investment gap, so the gap between the amount of investment in adaptation and transition in Brazil at the moment and what would be needed for Brazil to move to net zero on transition side and adapt so that its population and economy are somewhat sheltered from the brunt of climate hazards. That amounts to about an additional 1 to 2% of GDP per year. That may not sound like a lot. It's a small digit. It's a single digit. For a country like Brazil, in a government's budget, it is significant. It's a significant portion of what the country spends on education or health, for instance. So that's the difficult choice for the government, how to allocate finite resources to really these pressing needs. A country like Brazil is, however, in a fortunate, I think, position as a large emerging market that it can rely on a private sector that will find really opportunities, in particular on the transition side. So out of this amount, we estimate that it's likely that the private sector will take about half of it. For a country with much lower income than Brazil, the government is likely to shoulder the entirety or the vast majority of the cost, and this cost can be a lot more than that. Now, how do we look at what is being done in terms of adaptation, resilience? We've also looked at, the government makes not only a choice about where to allocate these finite resources, but it also makes an intertemporal choice between spending today or spending in a few years. And so we've looked at, does it make sense for a government to bring forward the adaptation investment, or does it make more sense to spend it later, let the economy grow to have more capacity to carry the cost? And what we found is that for countries in Asia in particular, it makes sense to bring that forward because the losses avoided in the future will recoup the cost of investment. That's not the case everywhere, so that's why we look at it on a country-by-country basis. So Veronica, to your question, that's how we're looking at it. It's really, are we here looking at a government and a set of institutions that are making that assessment about allocation of resources over time and are spending the money in a really as productive a way as possible. And where we see that happening, then that means that the credit risk in the future will be lower. So yes, that is, even though there might be an increase in debt initially, we will see through that, if you want, because we recognize that in the future that debt will be that much more sustainable.
I mean, that really shows how resilience over any time scale is intrinsically linked to fiscal balance and debt sustainability ultimately is really at the core of this. And I think that's a very interesting insight on the question of when, how this can be phased in the most capital efficient way, recognizing the need to kind of enable growth while also, ensuring that it is resilient into the future as shocks mount. Well, we do want to bring in any perspectives, questions from our guests that have joined us for this panel. If anyone has a question they'd like to pose to the panel, please raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. I can just pass you mine if you want.
Hi, my name is Pedro. I'm from Quercus, a ONG from Portugal. I would like to make. Yeah, it's better now. Okay. To Marcus, I'd like to make a question. I've been searching as an individual, not as a member of my organization, where I should invest my money, and there is basically no package of investment that is sustainable. All of them include at least one fossil fuel company. Would you like to elaborate on why is that, and if it's possible to exclude all those companies from packages in the future that claim they are sustainable? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so first of all, we can't make now in front of the audience and in general here in Brazil an advisory situation where I advise you on where to put the money. So maybe you have to come to Germany to do this.
This is not investment advice.
This is not investment advice. Disclaimer, all right, very clear, very clear. Everyone has listened to it. The second thing is, I'm not sure whether you're right, because maybe my banking or finance colleagues can reassure, but I know a lot of investment products which have really no exposure to fossil fuel. It's absolutely available, but it depends on where. So, and this is one topic going into strengthening financial architecture, that we do not have in every country the same level playing fields and the same regulation, disclosure regulations, etc. So one important thing. Second important thing is, of course, you can discuss the sectors which have to transform, becoming part of transition products, because they need to transition. If they don't transition, we have the problem of mitigation. And I also say that we see a lot of companies who get delisted from stock exchange because of their negative impact. They don't want to be listed anymore because then they are transparent. And the important thing is for financial market to play their role as part of the solution, we need transparency and we need access to those companies in order to support them in their transition. Last point I have to make, please don't fall into the trap that you think if you buy or sell an equity, you will change the world. It doesn't touch the capital position of the company. Except the majority of the world will go in this direction, but this is then engagement, right? This is a different topic. But first of all, as an investor purely, it's a risk-return question you have to answer for yourself. And there I have to say companies who are ignoring transition, who are ignoring the risk exposure, they are a risk. I don't want to have them because they also show me as an investor that they are not forward-looking, right? All these points you have to consider and to discuss before you make such a decision. But sorry, I'm an economist. I just have on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side answers, not a very straightforward one. But I hope it opened a little bit the room of idea.
Dana, do you want to come in there?
I'll just say one thing really fast. I actually think you're right. I've seen too many ESG funds that do have oil and gas exposure in there. So my suggestion would be look for sustainable thematic funds. I think, he mentioned engagement. So, for instance, Rockefeller, I'm just mentioning a fund, not saying you should invest in it, but Rockefeller does an ocean engagement fund, right? So it's very thematic to ocean. We're not going to have oil and gas, and it's got that engagement piece. So maybe doing a search, I've seen similar ones like circular economy. It's just really a nature fund. So thinking about the thematic approach might solve what you're looking for.
Thank you. Great question. And any other questions from the audience? Maybe as colleagues raise their hands. Okay, we have a few on this side.
Thank you so much. My name is Karin Westman. I'm from the Swedish Export Credit Agency. I was just wondering, in your perspective on export credit agencies' roles in the sort of de-risking the climate action that we need to see.
Great question.
Yeah, so we exactly used one for the transaction I've meant earlier at the beginning for a debt for impact swap for Benin. We did it with Aditi together, and it's very, very important that we use such instruments exactly to get the finance in the right projects flowing. But there are some prerequisites to fulfill as well, like understanding where the money is going, so the usage of proceeds. And in this case, it was a very clear development development goal framework where for everyone was clear where the money is going. So yes, absolutely spot on.
I would just add, hugely important. I mean, I think they stand right up there, alongside the MDBs. It's interesting because we use import banks all the time. I guess the question is, how are they going to evolve in terms of, particularly in terms of requirements for domestic, ties, domestic capacity. And it's interesting because some of the export-import banks are actually loosening that requirement in an effort to, advance capital mobilization. And I'd love to see more and more of that happen.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I think we have time for one more quick question. A colleague just here.
Yeah, hello, my name is Queenie. I am in Hong Kong. So I heard a lot of questions. I heard a lot of challenges to adaptation finance. Like we have to have government policy in place. We have to have the local community capacity. And also we know that a lot of capitals right now, they're not put in the right place. And we also know that there are external factors like the AI trends, they're sucking all the monies. So what can institutions do to promote all these, to promote the capital to the right place, like adaptation finance, knowing that a lot of adaptation finance, they're actually not even generating any cash flow. So I can imagine in an institution, they will have a lot of opposing voice saying that, oh, these assets, they're not generating money. Why would we put money to that? So in terms of that, what can institutions do?
Thank you. Perhaps the $1 trillion question of this conference.
Yeah, it's very tough question. Look, I think we touched on a little bit, which is data is so important. There are more and more studies coming out that showing $1 invested now saves somewhere between, we're all seeing difference like $4 to $10. And I think proving that point is going to be your best bet. And then just one other thing that's really important is just ensuring that, you think about, for a particular region, where those dollars are best invested for adaptation, and ensuring municipalities are linked to the governments. And that's, I think, going to be the ultimate unlock.
Yeah, so, sorry.
Sure. I will pick up on something Marcus said, actually, which is start with those dual use. Okay, so there are a number of technologies and project types that both contribute to mitigation and adaptation. So think about things like strengthening the resilience of your electricity grid. Think about things like distributed power generation solar, which enables both response to extreme weather and is lower carbon. So that's one great place to start. The other thing you can think through is continuing to innovate the different types of financial instruments. So one more that I didn't mention is, there are project types where, to the extent payment per services, we've seen this in the UK and some parts of Europe, where local businesses are paying for things like the dikes that are built, right? So continuing to innovate new models and then disseminating those models more broadly so that other jurisdictions can learn from them.
So what Veronica just said, we do a lot energy as a service because some companies, especially also in public sector, do not have capacity anymore on their balance sheet to finance the energy transition. Therefore, you can use energy as a service models, so which is very important. It's the idea. But coming back to the data topic, I really want everyone as a European to focus too much on further bureaucracy. What we need is now harmonizing the data we have. I know there are gazillions of white spots still, but we have enough data to start. But it must be harmonized. Financial market doesn't like too much different kind of data set where no one really knows what it is and shall I use it, or do I then potentially will face a lawsuit because I've used it, etc. Harmonization of the data and then contemporaneously closing these data gaps which are existing is, I think, the name of the game. And I always say during this COP, sewing on a bottom, right, takes 2 minutes. Not sewing it on 2 years, right? Start.
Thank you so much. I think we'll be pondering that one for a moment. But no, Veronica, I think really thank you for highlighting that focus on investments that meet both mitigation and adaptation goals, because I think those are the types of investments that are going to be job creating, growth positive, and support resilience over the long term. Yeah.
So one additional thing that we're seeing, noting that many jurisdictions are now also paying attention to their national sovereignty and making pledges to support defense spending. What I've seen a number of different companies who have these resilient solutions and mitigation solutions do is start to reframe them as these are key to national security. So my country, Canada, we have a burgeoning number of companies that can help to prevent forest fires. Well, gosh, if we could prevent forest fires, that means our soldiers can be on the front lines and not hosing down forests, right? So also there's also a bit of a reframing as well, which is mitigation, adaptation, both are essential to security and sovereignty.
No, thank you for bringing that in. And you know, there's been a lot of doom and gloom in the climate sphere this year, right? And I think coming from New York Climate Week, coming from our IIF annual meetings in Washington, D.C., alongside the World Bank, you know, it's easy to come away feeling kind of distraught and somewhat depressed. But ultimately, I think what we're seeing here is the mainstreaming that we've always been talking about in terms of climate, not as just a moral imperative, but a core priority for economic growth, resilience, security, and strategic autonomy. So maybe that's something that we can all take from this conversation. But before we finish, I have one final question. Looking ahead, let's envision we're ahead. I initially said in my question prompts 2 years at COP32, but there's so much happening and the world is moving so quickly. Let's say it's 1 year, so 12 months from now. What would you be celebrating if we were coming together to have this discussion again? What, in your mind, would be the greatest single step forward when we're thinking about these financial architecture issues and impact on climate and sustainability goals? Dana, I'll start with you.
Always tough going first. I actually have two come to mind. One is I'd love to see carbon credits become more of a part of NDCs and become more of, create more of a demand at the country level, the sovereign level. That's one. Two is, I think something Dori said earlier, just more and more collaboration and bring more types of organizations like private sector philanthropies into some of these structures, because together we can go a lot further.
Thank you. Veronica?
One would be something actually we're working with you on, which is there are some regulatory barriers that are holding, and they're very surgical in nature, that are holding back some of the more commercially, more heavily regulated financial institutions from participating in some of these transactions. So I think that's feasible in 1 year, hope maybe. And second, building, just building on what Dana said, I'd love to see even more types of partners, even more export credit agencies, even more community organizations, even more local banks, insurance companies, even more people around this table problem solving with us.
All right, bring everyone to the table, and we do have a lot of people here, so that's a great basis on which to move forward. Marie, come to you, please.
So I would say this has been the implementation COP, and I think a year from now it could be the evidence COP. So starting to really collect this evidence. I've heard a lot of case studies, examples, and I think it would be really satisfying if a year from now, collecting all of these examples, we start getting a sense of momentum and scale. I don't think we can expect these climate investment gaps to be filled. They will be with us for some time, but starting to really spot the areas where that momentum is really happening.
So, complex question for such a country pumpkin like me. I have two things. Not anymore talking about partnerships, living partnerships. So active partnerships is really key. And I can clearly tell you why. You don't build a house and then go to a bank and ask for finance. You do it in the planning. And then you see whether you get the finance or whether you have to augment the planning. And this is what we are missing at the COPs. This is what we are missing in local project finance, this at scale. I'm not saying that is not happening, right? But if we want to change the paradigm, we have to go in there. And this is what I expect in the future, that at COPs, we are also listening to the ones who have, in the end, to deliver this, which is us, people, which is corporations, which employ us people and deliver the solutions we want to see, and which is the financial markets, which makes this happen, because money is nothing more than a bus. It brings us from A to B, but you need a ticket and you need to know where you want to go.
Well, thank you so much. That brings us to the end of this discussion. We're out of time, and I would say from the number of attendees here and the great questions, clearly a topic as perhaps complex and technical as financial architecture is really important, and really something that is bringing people together to facilitate the collaboration we need. So thank you so much for joining us, and please join me in thanking the panel for their great intervention.